Hey there, tonight we're diving into the fall of Constantinople, where catapults met cannonballs and chivalry was nowhere in sight. What you're about to discover is a siege that shattered an empire and reshaped the world. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In the long parade of history, there are few empires that have danced so gracefully from sheer opulence to utter desolation as the Byzantine Empire. Imagine a civilization that once boasted more riches than a modern tech mogul's bank account, only to end up with less real estate than a monopoly board. The Byzantine Empire, once the eastern half of the Roman Empire, had its golden years, sparkling as brightly as the gold mosaics that adorned the ceilings of its churches. But by the time the 15th century rolled around, the empire was like a faded Instagram influencer, trying hard to maintain relevance with increasingly fewer followers. Let's rewind to the glory days, those fabulous centuries when Byzantium was the place to be. At its peak, the empire stretched across the eastern Mediterranean, covering what we know today as Greece, Turkey, parts of the Balkans, and even bits of North Africa. Its capital, Constantinople, was the envy of the medieval world, a bustling metropolis where east met west, and where silk and spices flowed like a never-ending Black Friday sale. The city was founded by Constantine the Great in 330 AD, and it wasn't just any city. It was the city, the new Rome, a strategic gateway between Europe and Asia. But as we all know, nothing gold can stay. By the 11th century, the Byzantine Empire started to wobble like a Jenga tower missing a few key pieces. The empire's economy, once buoyed by trade and taxation, began to show cracks. Agricultural productivity faltered, and with it, the empire's coffers started to rattle with a little less coin. The Crusades, those gallant, if misguided, quests for the Holy Land, didn't help much either. Instead of aiding their Christian brethren, the Crusaders often treated the Byzantine territories like a medieval buffet, helping themselves to whatever they fancied. The internal strife wasn't just economic, though. It was political, too, with more palace intrigue than a season of Game of Thrones. By the 13th century, the empire was playing host to a revolving door of emperors, each one seemingly less competent than the last. Civil wars became as common as papal decrees, and the Byzantine aristocracy was often too busy squabbling over titles to notice the barbarians at the gate. And then there was the Fourth Crusade in 1204, a debacle that ranks up there with history's greatest oops moments. Instead of marching to Jerusalem, the Crusaders, led by Venetian ambition and a fair dose of greed, sacked Constantinople itself. The city was left in ruins, with its treasures looted and its people devastated. Irony was palpable. The Christian Crusaders had managed to do what the Muslim armies had not, cripple the Byzantine capital. For the next half-century, Constantinople was ruled by a Latin empire, a puppet state propped up by Western European powers. The Byzantines eventually reclaimed their city in 1261, but the empire never fully recovered. Constantinople, once a jewel of civilization, was reduced to a shadow of its former self. By the 15th century, the mighty empire had shrunk to little more than the city itself and a few surrounding territories. Imagine the British Empire reduced to the city limits of London. It was a city-state with a past more glorious than its present, a historical heavyweight fighting in a bantamweight league. The Byzantine economy, once a robust engine of commerce, was now a sputtering jalopy. Trade routes had shifted, and the Black Death had taken its toll, reducing the population and, consequently, the tax base. With fewer people to tax and less land to control, the empire's revenue took a nosedive that would make the stock market crash of 1929 look like a minor correction. The Byzantine currency, the hyperpyron, once the strongest in the medieval world, had been devalued so many times it was starting to resemble monopoly money. Politically, the situation was no better. The ruling Palaiologos dynasty was as cash-strapped as a college student, and their attempts to secure foreign aid often ended in embarrassment. They had to rely on mercenaries for defense, a costly affair that drained what little resources were left. Diplomacy was a game of desperate gambles, with Byzantine envoys often returning empty-handed or with conditions that bordered on the humiliating. As if this wasn't enough, the Ottoman Turks were rising like a storm on the horizon. Under the astute leadership of sultans like Murad Roman II and his son Mehmet Roman II, the Ottomans had been expanding their territory at an alarming rate. By 1400, they had surrounded Constantinople on all sides, making the city look less like a proud capital and more like the last holdout in a game of risk. The Byzantines were left holding onto their city, hoping for a miracle that seemed increasingly unlikely. So there they were, once mighty Byzantines reduced to a city-state, living in the shadow of their own monuments, their empire now more of a memory than a reality. It's the historical equivalent of a washed-up rock star playing dive bars, hoping for a comeback that never comes. The stage was set for a dramatic finale, and spoiler alert, it wasn't going to be a happy ending. But that's a tale for another day. For now, let's just appreciate the tragic beauty of an empire that held on as long as it could, in a world that had moved on without it. As the Byzantines clung to their fading glory in a world that had long left them behind, enter stage right. Sultan Mehmed Roman II, the Ottoman wonderkind with a taste for conquest that would make Alexander the Great look like a dilettante. Just 21 years old, Mehmed wasn't your average millennial, if 15th century millennials were a thing. He didn't waste his time on medieval social media or jousting tournaments. He had his eyes set on something far grander, the crown jewel of cities, Constantinople. Now, Mehmed wasn't just ambitious. He was a chess master in the game of empires. His approach to warfare was as modern as it was medieval, blending brute force with strategic finesse. We're talking about a guy who understood logistics better than a Fortune 500 CEO. Mehmed knew that taking Constantinople wasn't just a matter of brute force. It required innovative siege tactics and cutting-edge technology. Enter one of his most famous creations, the Dardanelles gun. This cannon wasn't just big, it was audaciously, stupendously colossal. Imagine a weapon so massive that assembling it was akin to constructing a small building, built by a Hungarian engineer named Orban. Because when you need a giant cannon, you call in the experts. It was capable of hurling stone balls weighing over half a ton across a distance of a mile. That's right, this beast could lob a projectile weighing more than your typical smart car, making it the medieval equivalent of a nuclear deterrent. But Mehmed didn't stop at just crafting monstrous artillery. His genius was in the details, the kind of logistical mastery that would make UPS blush. The Bosporus Strait, that narrow slip of water separating Europe from Asia, was his personal highway, and he planned to use it like a pro. Mehmed established the fortress of Rumeli Hisari on the European side of the strait, opposite the older Anadolu Hisari on the Asian side, effectively turning the Bosporus into his own toll road. Anyone trying to sneak supplies into Constantinople by sea would have to pay the piper, or more accurately, face the wrath of Mehmed's cannons. And here's where we bust a few myths. The siege of Constantinople is often portrayed as a desperate, glorious last stand, a romantic notion, if there ever was one. But in reality, it was more like a meticulously planned heist. Mehmed's army was not just a rabble of conscripted peasants. It was a well-oiled machine, with tens of thousands of troops, including elite janissaries who were the SEAL Team 6 of their day. Numbers vary, but most agree Mehmed's forces topped 80,000 men, a staggering mass of humanity that made the Byzantine defenders, numbering around 7,000, look like the underdog in a David and Goliath story without the happy ending. And talk about timing. Mehmed knew that the Byzantine Empire was on its last legs, economically and politically. With the Black Death having previously thinned the population and trade routes shifting faster than a teenager's attention span, Constantinople was a sitting duck. The Byzantines, cash-strapped and desperate, had little to offer in terms of resistance beyond their formidable walls, the Theodosian walls, which had protected them for centuries. But even these legendary defenses were no match for the onslaught Mehmed was about to unleash. The siege began in April 1453, a grand spectacle of military might. The Ottoman strategy was straightforward: encircle, bombard, and breach. Mehmed had his troops dig trenches and build siege towers, while his artillery pounded the walls day and night. The psychological warfare was just as relentless. Picture the cacophony of cannon fire echoing through the city, each boom a grim reminder that the end was near. And here's a fun fact. Maimed even had a fleet of ships transported overland on greased logs to bypass the massive chain that blocked the Golden Horn, showcasing a level of strategic ingenuity that would make any military historian swoon. Despite the odds, the Byzantines held on bravely. Emperor Constantine Roman XI, the last Byzantine ruler, was determined to defend his city to the bitter end. But courage, while commendable, wasn't enough to stop the tide of history. The Byzantine forces were spread thin, and their allies, the Venetians and Genoese, were entangled in their own web of political complications, unable to send significant reinforcements. Now, here's where the human element creeps in. Imagine the citizens of Constantinople, caught in this epic struggle, clinging to their everyday lives amid the chaos. Imagine the despair and hope intertwined as they watched from the city walls, witnessing the relentless advance of Maime's forces. It's a poignant reminder that history isn't just about grand strategies and epic battles. It's about people, real people, caught in the crossfire of events far larger than themselves. So, as the siege dragged on, the pressure mounted. Maime's forces tightened the noose around Constantinople, and the city's defenders, valiant but weary, braced for the inevitable. The fall of Constantinople was no longer a question of if, but when. And while the Byzantines held on to their hope of divine intervention, the reality was that Maime's siege was a masterclass in military strategy, one that would soon bring an age-old empire to its knees. But hold your horses, because the story's not quite over yet. Stay tuned as we unravel the dramatic conclusion of this epic saga in the next installment. As the siege of 1453 unfolded, Maimed Roman II displayed the kind of relentless determination that would make a marathon runner look like a casual jogger. So, what kept Constantinople standing for those nail-biting 53 days? Let's break it down. Emperor Constantine Roman XI was the kind of leader who could rally a crowd with a speech more stirring than an Oscar acceptance monologue. His defenders were a motley crew, a ragtag band of Byzantine locals mixed with a smattering of foreign mercenaries and volunteers, including Genoese and Venetian soldiers who had more allegiances than a double agent. In total, they numbered around 7,000, a mere handful compared to the colossal Ottoman force breathing down their necks. Constantine was no stranger to tough odds, but even he must have felt like he was playing chess with half the pieces missing. The Theodosian walls, a defensive marvel of their time, had withstood over 1,000 years of attacks. Stretching nearly 14 miles, these walls were the city's first and last line of defense. They were built to withstand sieges that would make even the most ardent wargamer's heart race, with 3 layers of fortifications, including moats, inner and outer walls, and a series of towers. But here's the rub. These walls were built for the Middle Ages, not the gunpowder age that Maimed had ushered in with his big, bad cannons. Then there was the infamous chain across the Golden Horn. Picture this, a massive iron chain, each link as thick as a grown man's arm, stretched across the harbor to prevent enemy ships from sailing in. This was the Byzantines' ace up their sleeve, a strategic line drawn in the water that said, "You shall not pass." It was like the naval version of a 90s club bouncer, and it worked wonders until Maimed decided to think outside the box, literally. Remember that overland ship transport trick? It was a stroke of genius that would make even a magician jealous. Now, let's talk about the geography. Constantinople's location was both its greatest strength and its Achilles heel. Nestled between the Sea of Marmara and the Golden Horn, it was a natural fortress, a city seemingly designed by a paranoid architect. Yet, this strategic positioning also made it a juicy target for anyone with imperial ambitions. The city was a crossroads of continents, the doorstop of Europe, and the doormat of Asia. Control it, and you controlled the gateway to the east, a prospect too tempting for Maimed to resist. But even with these formidable defenses and strategic positioning, the city had its vulnerabilities, and fate, or perhaps folly, played a cruel hand. The unresolved mystery of the unlocked gate is the stuff of historical legend, the kind of story that conspiracy theorists dine out on. According to some accounts, a small gate in the walls, known as the Kerkerporter, was left open, allowing a contingent of Ottoman soldiers to sneak in and sow chaos. Was it a simple oversight, a betrayal, or a desperate act of sabotage? The truth remains as elusive as a politician's promise, but it adds a layer of intrigue to an already dramatic tale. As the siege wore on, the weight of history bore down on Constantine and his defenders. Supplies dwindled, morale wavered, and the ominous rumble of maimed cannons became a constant soundtrack to their lives. The defenders patched up the walls as best they could, using stones, wood, and whatever materials they could scrounge. It was like trying to hold back a flood with a stack of sandbags, noble but ultimately futile. Yet their efforts were nothing short of heroic. Imagine standing atop those crumbling walls, staring out at a sea of enemy soldiers, and knowing that, despite your best efforts, the end was near. While the siege was a tale of military might and strategic brilliance, it was also a story of human resilience. The citizens of Constantinople, caught in the maelstrom of history, carried on with their lives as best they could. They prayed, they hoped, and some even dared to dream of a miraculous salvation. But in the end, Maime's relentless assault proved too much for a city that was already a ghost of its former self. What really sealed the fate of Constantinople was not just the overwhelming Ottoman numbers or the massive cannons, but the sheer inevitability of the empire's decline. This was a civilization that had been teetering on the brink for centuries, and Maimed was the final gust of wind that toppled the house of cards. The Byzantines were outmatched, outgunned, and outmaneuvered at every turn. Their allies, the Venetians and Genoese, were like fair-weather friends, promising support but delivering little more than moral encouragement. In the early hours of May 29, 1453, the final assault began. Maime's forces, like an unstoppable tide, surged forward, crashing against the walls with a ferocity that left no room for doubt. The defenders fought valiantly, Emperor Constantine among them, refusing to leave his post even as the city fell around him. His last known words, according to some accounts, were a call to his troops to fight bravely, a final rallying cry before vanishing into the chaos of battle, a tragic but fitting end for the last Byzantine emperor. As the Ottomans breached the walls, the fate of Constantinople was sealed. The city, which had once been the glittering jewel of Christendom, was now at the mercy of Maime's army. The fall of Constantinople marked the end of an era, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter, one written by the Ottomans with a mixture of ambition and ruthlessness. Yet, even in defeat, there was a strange beauty to the fall of Constantinople. It was a testament to the resilience of a people who, despite overwhelming odds, refused to go quietly into the night. It was a story of human determination in the face of insurmountable challenges, a reminder that history is not just about grand empires and epic battles, but about the people who lived, loved, and fought within them. And so, as the dust settled, and the city was transformed under Ottoman rule, the world changed forever. The Byzantines, once masters of their domain, faded into history, leaving behind a legacy as rich and complex as the mosaics that adorned their churches. Constantinople, now Istanbul, would rise again under new rulers, a testament to the enduring power of a city that refused to be forgotten. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's more to this story, and the full tale of the fall of Constantinople is far from over. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this epic saga, where we'll dive into the aftermath of the siege and explore the transformation of a city that has captivated the world for centuries. As the dust settled over the fallen city of Constantinople, the Ottomans got busy transforming it into their own cultural and political hub. But what about the immediate chaos? Well, imagine a city waking up from a nightmare, only to find the nightmare was now reality. The once glorious streets of Constantinople were filled with the echoes of change. People were reeling, trying to understand the new order that had swept over them faster than a medieval gossip. First things first, the sack of the city. Maime's forces, having breached the walls, did what conquering armies did best, pillage. It wasn't just about looting material treasures. It was also about breaking the spirit of a city that had held out against the odds. Churches were converted into mosques, the most famous being Hagia Sophia, which transitioned from the heart of Eastern Orthodox Christianity into one of Islam's grandest mosques. Talk about a change of scenery. It was as if the spiritual GPS of the city had been recalibrated overnight. Now, let's talk economics. With the fall of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire's currency, already resembling a penny stock, crashed faster than you can say. Hyperpyron. Trade routes, once a bustling network weaving through Byzantium, faced a massive overhaul. The city had been a linchpin in the silk and spice trade, and suddenly those routes had to be rerouted or renegotiated. Europe had been relying on Byzantine middlemen to get their hands on Eastern goods, and with Constantinople now in Ottoman hands, it was time to rethink the whole business model. Here's the kicker. This disruption in trade was a catalyst for change. The Europeans, not ones to be left without their beloved spices or silk, started looking for new routes. Enter the age of exploration. The fall of Constantinople is often cited as one of the nudges that pushed Europeans to look westward, culminating in Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492. It's like the medieval version of losing your favorite local shop and deciding to start ordering online. But the economic shake-up wasn't the only ripple effect. The fall of Constantinople also sparked an intellectual exodus. Byzantine scholars, realizing that their days in the city were numbered, packed up their scrolls, manuscripts, and whatever else they could carry and headed west. This wasn't just a brain drain, it was a cerebral landslide. We're talking about scholars who had been hoarding knowledge like it was medieval Bitcoin, and now they were spreading that wealth across Europe. This influx of Byzantine knowledge, particularly ancient Greek and Roman texts, played a pivotal role in fueling the Renaissance. Imagine Florence, Venice, and other European cities suddenly buzzing with the kind of intellectual excitement that would make a tech startup look like a knitting club. The Renaissance was already simmering, but these scholars turned up the heat, bringing with them knowledge that had been tucked away in Byzantine libraries for centuries. And let's not forget the cultural ramifications. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves through the Christian world, and not the good kind. It was a wake-up call, a glaring reminder that the Christian kingdoms had been too busy squabbling amongst themselves to notice the Ottoman Empire's meteor-like rise. The fall was the ultimate you snooze, you lose moment for the Christian West. The realization that one of the great bastions of Christendom had fallen to Muslim forces was a jolt that echoed through Europe, sparking a mix of fear, outrage, and a renewed zeal for religious unity. Well, as much unity as a continent riddled with its own internal conflicts could muster. But here's the myth-busting moment. While it's tempting to see the fall of Constantinople through the lens of religious conflict alone, the reality was far more complex. Yes, religion played a role, but this was also about power, territory, and economic dominance. Maimed Roman II wasn't just a religious zealot. He was a shrewd political operator, savvy in the ways of international diplomacy and warfare. His conquest of Constantinople was as much about securing a strategic and economic foothold as it was about spreading the faith. In the aftermath, Europe had to recalibrate its strategies. The fall of Constantinople was a grim reminder that empires, like empires before them, could fall, and fall hard. It served as a cautionary tale of the dangers of complacency and the need for adaptability in a rapidly changing world. The Christian nations began rethinking their alliances and military strategies, realizing that the Ottoman threat was not just a distant rumble, but a thunderstorm on their very doorstep. Meanwhile, Constantinople, now Istanbul, began its transformation. Maimed Roman II, ever the visionary, didn't just want to conquer, he wanted to build. He invited traders, artisans, and scholars to the city, turning it into a vibrant, cosmopolitan hub. Under Ottoman rule, Istanbul flourished, becoming a beacon of cultural and economic power, a juxtaposition of East and West that would shape its identity for centuries to come. So, as we look back on the fall of Constantinople, it's clear that this was no mere footnote in history. It was a seismic shift, a turning point that sent ripples across Europe and beyond. The fall marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new world order, one in which the Ottoman Empire would play a starring role. But as with all great historical sagas, the story doesn't end here. The fall of Constantinople was just the prologue to a much larger narrative, one that would continue to unfold in the centuries to come. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the aftermath and explore how this monumental event continued to shape the world in unexpected ways. In the grand tapestry of history, the fall of Constantinople isn't just a thread. It's a full-blown stitch that sewed together the medieval and modern worlds. But let's kick off with a reality check. The romanticized notion of Constantinople's last stand is more Hollywood than history. Sure, there was bravery and valiant defense, but reality was as much about desperate pragmatism as it was about defiance. The idea of a noble last stand makes for great bedtime stories, but it glosses over the gritty truth. By the time maimed Roman II knocked on its gates, Constantinople wasn't a city of knights and chivalry. It was a city trying to make ends meet. Think of it as a once grand mansion, now struggling with a leaking roof and bills piling up faster than the Empire State Building. The Byzantine authorities weren't just warriors. They were also desperate negotiators, juggling allegiances like they were auditioning for a diplomatic circus. Let's talk numbers. Constantinople, at this point, was a ghost town compared to its prime. The city's population had dwindled to roughly 50,000 from its peak of 500,000. The Byzantine Empire itself was more of a city-state than a sprawling dominion, with its territories shrunk to the city and a few other patches of land. Economically, they were in the red. They couldn't even afford to pay their last batch of mercenaries. The empire's treasury was emptier than a politician's promise, and Emperor Constantine Roman XI was essentially left to defend the city with whatever scraps he could muster. And then there's Maimed, the pragmatic conqueror. His victory wasn't just about martial prowess. It was about savvy strategy and technological innovation. Maimed was the Steve Jobs of siege warfare, and his use of massive cannons was the medieval equivalent of an iPhone launch. Game-changing. His army of about 80,000 wasn't just a horde. It was a disciplined force capable of executing complex military maneuvers. This was less a battle and more a masterclass in logistics, where brute force met meticulous planning. Maimed's conquest was as much about outsmarting as outmanning the Byzantines, proving that sometimes the pen, or in this case, the cannon, is mightier than the sword. The fall of Constantinople signaled a seismic shift. It was a wake-up call, not just for the Byzantines who were now reading their empire's obituary, but for the entire European continent. This wasn't just a city falling, it was a domino, setting off a chain reaction that would ripple across continents and centuries. The fall marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, a civilization that had stood for over a millennium, and it sent shockwaves through a Christendom that had been caught with its defenses, both literal and metaphorical, down. Let's not sugarcoat it. The fall of Constantinople was brutal. The sack of the city was a 3-day spree of looting and chaos, a grim reminder of the harsh realities of conquest. But Maimed, ever the visionary, wasn't satisfied with just destruction. He saw potential where others saw ruins. Under his rule, Constantinople, now Istanbul, was reborn, becoming a vibrant nexus of trade and culture, a city where East truly met West. Maimed invited artisans, traders, and scholars, turning the city into a melting pot that would define its identity for centuries. The economic ramifications were profound. With the city now under Ottoman control, European traders had to rethink their routes. The spice trade, that medieval gold rush, had to be reimagined, and it sparked the age of exploration. In a twist of fate, the fall of Constantinople indirectly led to Columbus and others setting sail for the New World. It's like losing your job only to discover your true calling was something else entirely. Culturally, the fall prompted a westward migration of Byzantine scholars who carried with them the intellectual treasures of the ancient world. Their arrival in Europe sowed the seeds of the Renaissance, a cultural rebirth that would transform art, science, and philosophy. The knowledge they brought was like pouring gasoline on the already smoldering embers of European curiosity and creativity. Yet, for all its romance, the fall of Constantinople wasn't just a story of glorious battles and cultural exchanges. It was a tale of realpolitik, of shifting alliances and emerging empires. The Ottomans didn't just conquer, they adapted and thrived, building upon the legacy of the Byzantines even as they forged their own path. Under their rule, Istanbul became a beacon of Ottoman power, a city that would stand at the heart of an empire that stretched across 3 continents. So, what's the takeaway from all this? The fall of Constantinople is a reminder that history is stranger and more complex than fiction. It's not just about the rise and fall of empires. It's about the people, the decisions, and the chance events that shape our world. It's a story of resilience, of how even in defeat, a city can rise again, transformed and revitalized. And while the Byzantines may have faded into history, their legacy endures, a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity, adaptability, and spirit. In the end, the fall of Constantinople was both an end and a beginning. It closed the chapter on one of history's great empires, but it also opened the door to a new era of exploration, innovation, and cultural exchange. It's a potent reminder that the end of one story is often just the prologue to another, that history is a tapestry woven from the threads of countless lives and events. And as we look back on that fateful day in 1453, it's clear that the echoes of Constantinople's fall continue to resonate, a powerful testament to the enduring dance of history. The crack of civilization, somewhere between the Tigris and Euphrates, the Sumerians woke up one day and thought, "Hey, you know what sounds like a brilliant idea? Mud bricks." And just like that, the first urban trend was born. No Wi-Fi, no skyscrapers, just good old-fashioned mud smushed into bricks. It wasn't a fancy architectural choice, it was a practical one. In a land where trees were about as rare as a unicorn at a dog show, mud was abundant, cheap, and surprisingly durable. So they built ziggurats, temples that looked like staircases for the guards to descend upon, or at least that's what they hoped. Now, Sumerians didn't just stop at mud bricks. They were the overachievers of their time, giving the world writing, mathematics, and the wheel. Yes, the wheel. That round thing that revolutionized transportation and got the whole rolling thing going. But let's not get carried away by romanticizing their genius. The reality was a bit grimmer. Many Sumerians didn't know how to read and write. Cuneiform, their wedge-shaped writing, was more of a specialized skill than a common pastime. You'd have to be part of an elite scribble class to even dream of etching your thoughts into clay tablets, which, fun trivia, were the ancient equivalent of a hard drive. Just a lot heavier and definitely not pocket-friendly. Enter the Akkadians, swaggering onto the stage like the original influencers. They were the first to pull off a full-blown empire, thanks to Sargon of Akkad, who might have been the first person in history to understand the power of branding. He didn't just conquer, he created a narrative. His empire, which stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, was a political flex of epic proportions. Sargon boasted about his humble beginnings. His mother was a priestess, and he was set adrift in a basket on the Euphrates, an origin story eerily similar to another famous dude, Moses. Coincidence? Maybe. Effective PR? Definitely. Sargon's empire wasn't just about clout. It was a logistical marvel that needed some serious administrative skills to keep it together. You can imagine the paperwork, or the clay work in this case. But the Akkadians didn't just write up tax receipts and decrees. They were cultural magpies, picking up Sumerian ideas and remixing them into something new. They took Sumerian cuneiform, slapped their own Semitic language on it, and voila, Akkadian became the lingua franca of the region. It was like taking over someone's Instagram account and rebranding it with your own memes. And while we're on the topic of rebranding, let's chat about Hammurabi, the Babylonian king whose claim to fame was a code of laws that people still talk about today. Hammurabi's code is often hailed as the first great legal document, but it's more like a greatest hits album of rules that had been floating around Mesopotamia for ages. What Hammurabi did was brilliant in its simplicity. He took existing laws, wrote them all down on a massive stone stele, and put it out there like, "Hey guys, check it out. I've got laws and I know how to use them." The code itself was a mix of justice and, well, some eyebrow-raising penalties. Got caught stealing, you might lose a hand. Built a house that collapsed and killed someone. Congratulations, you've just lined yourself up for a death sentence. It sounds harsh, but it was a step toward a society governed by laws rather than whims, and that was revolutionary. Plus, Hammurabi's code was written in Akkadian, which gave it the kind of mass appeal you'd expect from an ancient bestseller. But let's not put too much shine on that stone stele. For all its fame, Hammurabi's code was less about justice and more about control. It was a tool to consolidate power and keep the Babylonian Empire running smoothly. It was more Game of Thrones than it was Magna Carta. While the romantic notion of Hammurabi as a wise lawgiver persists, the reality was that his laws reflected a society deeply divided by class, where the life of a noble was worth far more than that of a commoner or a slave. So, what do we take away from the dawn of civilization in Mesopotamia? It was a time of mud bricks and mighty empires, of storytelling and statecraft, where the seeds of urban life and legal systems were sown. Sure, they didn't have smartphones or social media, but they had their own ways of influencing and innovating. They laid the groundwork for what would become the complex tapestry of human civilization. And while we might chuckle at their mud bricks or frown at their harsh laws, they were pioneers, often stumbling, sometimes tyrannical, but undeniably groundbreaking. As we leap from the fertile crescent to the land of the Nile, let's take a gander at ancient Egypt, where pharaohs had a peculiar penchant for slapping giant rocks into pointy shapes. These oversized stone triangles, or pyramids as we like to call them, were more than just colossal tombstones. They were the ultimate flex, a testament to divine authority, and let's be honest, a bit of an ego trip. Imagine channeling your inner megalomaniac, but instead of collecting cars, you're collecting limestone blocks by the million. Speaking of millions, the Great Pyramid of Giza, that iconic tourist magnet, is composed of about 3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons. That's about the weight of an average elephant, but don't worry, no elephants were harmed in the making of these pyramids. The Egyptians were nothing if not ambitious, and moving these slabs required a workforce with more grit than your average CrossFit class. Now, let's set the scene. It's around 560 BCE, and Pharaoh Khufu decides he's going to one-up his predecessors. Forget little pyramids, he's going for the big leagues. The plan, a structure rising to 481 feet, taller than any man-made structure, until the Lincoln Cathedral stole the title in 1311. It's a bit like holding the world record for most consecutive kickflips for over 3,000 years, except with a lot more manual labor and fewer skateboards. And what motivated this grandiose project? Aside from the promise of eternal life and a sweet afterlife setup, it was a combination of religious devotion and a well-oiled bureaucratic machine. The workers, often referred to as conscripted laborers, were not slaves as popular myth suggests. Nope, these were skilled laborers who signed up for pyramid duty, likely with the promise of beer and bread. Because what's a little back-breaking labor without carbs, and a cold one? But let's not romanticize the situation too much. We're talking about a society that knew how to squeeze productivity out of every sweat-soaked endeavor. These workers were organized into teams, with titles like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkora, which, let's face it, would make great names for intramural sports teams today. The logistics were staggering, with evidence suggesting that around 20,000 to 30,000 laborers were involved in the project at any given time. Picture a bustling construction site, minus hard hats and safety vests, but with a lot more sand and papyrus paperwork. The economic reality was also a driving force. The construction of a pyramid was as much about providing employment and food security as it was about commemorating a pharaoh's reign. Think of it as an ancient version of a New Deal job program, except your shovel is a wooden sled, and your task is to haul multi-ton blocks across the desert. It was a way to keep the population busy during the flooding of the Nile, when farming took a backseat and construction became the main gig in town. But how did they manage to haul these gargantuan stones up to such dizzying heights without modern machinery? Theories abound, from straight ramps to spiral ones, but the truth is, no one's entirely sure. What we do know is that the ancient Egyptians had a knack for innovation. They used sledges to drag stones across the sand, likely lubricating the ground with water to reduce friction, a trick that modern-day scientists have only recently confirmed as effective. Of course, the grandeur of these pyramids wasn't just about the engineering prowess. It was about cementing the pharaoh's legacy, securing a spot in the history books, and hopefully a cushy afterlife lounging with the gods. The pyramids were, quite literally, stairways to heaven, or at least that was the sales pitch. But let's not forget the people behind the stones, the artisans and laborers who toiled away, leaving behind graffiti that has survived millennia. These ancient taggers left us a glimpse into their world, where team pride was etched into stone with lines like, "How drunk is the crew today?" proving that even in ancient times, a little humor went a long way. As the sun set on the Old Kingdom, the pyramids' appeal waned. Later dynasties opted for stealthier burial sites in the Valley of the Kings, perhaps realizing that a giant stone beacon wasn't the best way to keep grave robbers at bay. But for those few centuries, the pyramids stood as symbols of order, power, and a touch of vanity, casting long shadows over the sands of time. In the end, the pyramids are as much about the people who built them as they are about the pharaohs they commemorated. They remind us that history is a story of both monumental achievements and the everyday lives that made them possible. As we continue this journey through ancient Egypt, keep in mind that behind every oversized stone triangle, there was a workforce fueled by bread, beer, and perhaps a touch of begrudging admiration for their royal employers. Now, as the echoes of hammering stone and ancient graffiti fade into the sands of Egypt, let's hop across the Arabian Sea to a land that was just as bustling, yet shrouded in mystery, the Indus Valley. This ancient civilization, flourishing around 2600 BCE, was a marvel of urban planning, and its cities were like the Silicon Valley of the Bronze Age, only with less tech and more terracotta. Welcome to the Indus Valley civilization, home to thriving metropolises like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. These cities were the blueprint for urban living long before blueprints were a thing. Imagine a grid system so precise, it would make your local city planner weep tears of envy. Streets were laid out in perfect right angles, not a single cow path in sight. And the engineering didn't stop there. The Indus people had a drainage system that would put many modern cities to shame. We're talking about covered drains along the streets and sophisticated sewage systems that suggest they took hygiene seriously, probably more seriously than your average college dorm. But what's truly intriguing is their script, still undeciphered after all these millennia. Picture a world where the Rosetta Stone equivalent is missing, and you've got a handful of symbols that look like a cross between emojis and ancient runes. It's the original cryptic crossword, and despite the best efforts of linguists worldwide, the meanings remain elusive. Some hypothesize it was used for trade or religious purposes, but without a multilingual dictionary, we're left guessing. So, for now, the Indus script is like the universe's way of keeping their secrets locked up tighter than a pharaoh's tomb. Now, about those city layouts. The Indus planners were meticulous. Each block was a self-contained unit, with homes built from uniform, oven-baked bricks, which was the Indus version of keeping up with the Joneses. They even had standardized weights and measures, which was crucial for trade, especially when you're dealing with a civilization that stretched over 1 million square kilometers. Compare that to the size of modern-day Pakistan, and you'll get a sense of their reach. Economically, the Indus Valley was a powerhouse. Their trade networks extended all the way to Mesopotamia, a couple of thousand kilometers away, as evidenced by seals and pottery found in both regions. Think of it as the ancient version of Amazon Prime, but with clay tablets instead of digital transactions. Goods like cotton, beads, and precious metals flowed through these trade routes like gossip in a high school cafeteria. But here's the kicker. Despite all these achievements, the Indus Valley civilization vanished around 1900 BCE, leaving behind more questions than answers. Was it climate change, invasion, internal strife? Theories abound, but the truth remains as murky as the waters of the Indus River. Some scientists suggest a massive drought hit the region, causing the mighty Indus River to change its course, which would have been a death sentence for an agrarian society. Others propose that a decline in trade with the Mesopotamians led to economic collapse. Whatever the cause, it's clear that their disappearance was swifter than you can say, Harappa. The irony is that while we've built entire disciplines around the rise and fall of civilizations like the Romans, the Indus Valley story is a tantalizing puzzle missing its key pieces. It's a reminder that history is not always a straight line, but a series of question marks, a tapestry with sections that have faded into the ether. For all their architectural prowess and urban sophistication, the people of the Indus Valley left behind no grand monuments, no pyramids or ziggurats to pierce the sky, just the remnants of their cities and the tantalizing hint of an advanced culture. Their legacy is not in towering structures, but in the bricks and mortar of their everyday life. A reminder that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas are the ones that keep the water running and the streets clean. As we peer into the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, we're left to wonder about the people who lived there. They were urbanites long before it was fashionable, with a penchant for organization and a knack for trade. Their story is a testament to the creativity and resilience of human civilization, even if it's one we're still trying to fully understand. So, as we wrap up this journey through the Indus Valley, remember that the past doesn't always reveal its secrets easily. It's a dance between discovery and mystery, where sometimes the questions are just as important as the answers. As we continue this historical odyssey, we'll leave the valley behind and look toward new horizons, carrying with us the lessons of those who came before. As we leave behind the enigmatic ruins of the Indus Valley, our historical GPS takes us on a vivid journey to ancient China, where the stage is set for the Qin dynasty's rise. This era wasn't just a chapter in the scrolls of history. It was a plot twist where everything was either a towering wall or a spectacular collapse. And at the heart of it all was Emperor Qin Shi Huang, a man whose quest for eternal life was like a Shakespearean tragedy wrapped in a fortune cookie. Let's dive right into Emperor Qin's grand ambitions, starting with the Great Wall of China. Forget about those quaint garden fences. This was the mother of all barriers. Construction began around 221 BCE, and it was less about keeping rabbits out and more about fending off pesky nomadic invasions. Stretching over 13,000 miles, this wasn't just a wall, it was a statement. The kind that says, we're serious about our boundaries. The wall was a logistical marvel, built using whatever materials were at hand: earth, wood, bricks, and even the occasional rammed earth. Laborers, soldiers, and convicts were conscripted for the task, and let's not sugarcoat it. The working conditions were brutal. It's estimated that hundreds of thousands worked on this project, and many never saw their families again. The wall may have been designed to keep enemies out, but it also trapped a lot of workers in. And then there's the myth of Qin Shi Huang's quest for immortality. If you thought the Fountain of Youth was a tall tale, wait till you hear about this guy's obsession. He was the original health guru, except his supplements were more toxic elixir than kale smoothie. Qin Shi Huang sent expeditions searching for the elixir of life and consulted with alchemists who promised him eternal life. Unluckily for him, their potions often contained mercury. Yes, that mercury, the toxic heavy metal. Instead of gaining immortality, he gained himself a front-row seat to the afterlife by dying at the tender age of 49. Talk about a self-fulfilling prophecy. But before you write him off as just another emperor with delusions of grandeur, consider his terracotta army. Unearthed in 1974, this collection of over 8,000 life-sized soldiers, horses, and chariots was buried alongside Qin Shi Huang to protect him in the afterlife. Think of it as the OG security system, complete with infantry, cavalry, and archers. These weren't just cookie-cutter clones. Each figure had unique features, facial expressions, and hairstyles. It's like ancient China's version of customizing your avatar in a video game, except with clay and a lot more patience. The terracotta army wasn't just a vanity project. It was a reflection of the emperor's military might and the centralized power he wielded. Qin Shi Huang wasn't content with just being remembered as a ruler. He wanted to dominate in death, too. And while the army was meant to guard him in the afterlife, it inadvertently became one of the greatest archaeological finds in history. It's like finding a buried city of action figures, each one telling a story of the era's craftsmanship and artistry. Now, let's talk economics, because building walls and armies doesn't come cheap. The Qin dynasty's approach to financing these grand projects was as ruthless as its construction methods. Heavy taxation and forced labor were the order of the day, leading to widespread discontent. The economic burden on the populace was a ticking time bomb, one that would eventually contribute to the dynasty's downfall. It's a classic tale of overreach, where the emperor's ambitions stretched further than the empire's resources. Politically, Qin Shi Huang was a trailblazer, centralizing power, standardizing weights and measures, and even unifying the script across his empire. His reforms laid the groundwork for what would become a unified Chinese state, but at a cost. His rule was marked by censorship, book burnings, and the execution of scholars who dared to challenge his authority. It's the kind of heavy-handed governance that makes modern autocrats look like playground bullies. So what's the takeaway from this chapter of ancient China? It's a story of monumental achievements and equally monumental failures. Qin Shi Huang's reign was a paradox, a time of great unification and innovation, yet also of oppression and excess. The Great Wall endures as a symbol of perseverance, while the terracotta army remains a testament to the emperor's enduring legacy. albeit cloaked in the shadow of his mortality quest. As we pause to reflect on this era, it's clear that history is not just about the grand designs or the epic fails. It's about the people caught in the crossfire of ambition and reality. Emperor Qin Shi Huang's story is one of hubris and ingenuity, of dreams that soared as high as the walls he built and fell as swiftly as his untimely demise. And while his quest for immortality may have ended in ironic tragedy, the legacy of his reign continues to echo through the corridors of history. With our gaze still set on the East, we'll continue to unravel the next chapter in this historical saga. As we move forward, remember that the past is a tapestry woven with the threads of ambition and consequence, a reminder that every empire, no matter how mighty, is but a footnote in the annals of time. As we pivot from the grandeur and ambition of ancient China, let's set sail across the Mediterranean to the sun-kissed shores of Greece, where democracy had its humble beginnings, and where guards were as plentiful as coffee shops in Seattle. The Greeks were the original philosophers, athletes, and dramatists, and they had a knack for turning every aspect of life into an art form or a competition, depending on their mood. Welcome to ancient Greece, a land of city-states, each with its own flavor, and often its own version of the best way to live. Athens, in particular, was the birthplace of democracy around 508 BCE, a system where citizens could vote on decisions affecting their lives. But let's not get too starry-eyed about the birth of democracy. The reality was that Athenian democracy wasn't exactly the inclusive utopia we might idealize today. Out of a population of roughly 300,000, only about 30,000 were considered citizens with voting rights. Women, slaves, and foreigners, who together made up the majority of the population, were conveniently excluded from the decision-making process. So much for equality, right? Despite its limitations, Athenian democracy was a revolutionary concept. It was like handing the keys of a sports car to a brand-new driver. Sure, it was a bit reckless, but it laid the groundwork for the political systems we have today. Citizens could gather in the assembly, where they engaged in heated debates and voted on issues ranging from military campaigns to public spending. It was participatory government, ancient style, with the occasional fistfight for good measure. While Athens was busy inventing democracy, Sparta was perfecting the art of war. The Spartans were the ultimate military machine, with a society structured around producing soldiers as formidable as their reputations. Boys were sent to the agoge, a rigorous training program at age 7. They were taught survival skills, combat, and the Spartan way of life, a life that was about as cushy as a bed of nails. And if you think modern boot camps are tough, try enduring the Spartan lifestyle, where weakness was about as welcome as a snowstorm in July. But let's not forget the Olympic Games, a cornerstone of Greek culture and one of history's longest-running events. The first recorded games took place in 776 BCE at Olympia, and they were less about gold medals and more about showcasing physical prowess and honoring Zeus. Athletes competed nude, ostensibly to celebrate the human body, but also because, let's face it, togas weren't exactly aerodynamic. The events included running, wrestling, and the pancration, a no-holds-barred brawl that was as close to MMA as you could get in antiquity. Winning an olive wreath was the ultimate accolade, and victors were celebrated like rock stars, with free meals for life and front-row seats at public events. Economically, the games were a boon. They attracted spectators from all over Greece, boosting trade and strengthening diplomatic ties between city-states. It was the original tourism industry, with merchants selling everything from trinkets to fine pottery, much like the souvenir shops that line the streets of modern Olympic host cities. Now, let's hop across the Adriatic to Rome, where the Republic was setting the stage for an empire that would stretch from Britain to Egypt. Roman roads were the lifelines of the empire, engineered with precision and stretching over 250,000 miles. These roads were the Google Maps of antiquity, minus the voice navigation and traffic updates. They facilitated trade, troop movements, and communication, binding the vast empire together like a web of stone and ambition. Rome's political scene was a complex labyrinth of power struggles, with the Senate, the consuls, and eventually the emperors playing a game of thrones that would make even the most seasoned politicians dizzy. Julius Caesar, a name that echoes through history like a trumpet blast. Learn the hard way that in politics, your best friends can turn into your worst enemies faster than you can say, "Et tu, brute." His assassination on the Ides of March in 44 BCE was a stark reminder that power is a dangerous game, and even the mightiest can fall. Economically, the Roman Empire was a juggernaut, driven by conquest and trade. The Romans were master builders, constructing aqueducts, amphitheaters, and public baths that were the envy of the ancient world. Their currency, the denarius, was the backbone of the economy, facilitating trade across provinces. Yet the Roman economy was also built on the backs of slaves, who comprised about a third of the population. The reality was that for every grand structure and luxurious villa, there was a workforce living in shadows, their toil the unacknowledged engine of empire. And what about the infamous Roman bread and circuses? The Colosseum, inaugurated in 80 CE, was a testament to Rome's love of spectacle. It seated 50,000 spectators and hosted gladiatorial games that were part sport, part bloodbath. The games were a tool for social control, a way to placate the masses with entertainment while distracting them from political and economic woes. It's a strategy as old as time. Keep the people amused, and they might just overlook the cracks in the system. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Greece and Rome, what can we take away from these classical civilizations? They were pioneers of democracy and engineering, of art and philosophy. But they were also societies rife with inequality and power struggles, where the grand narratives often eclipsed the gritty realities of everyday life. History is a tapestry woven with ambition and consequence, with each thread telling a story of human triumph and folly. We've seen how the Greeks and Romans shaped the world in ways that still resonate today. Their legacies are etched in stone and myth, reminding us of the heights humanity can reach and the depths to which it can fall. As we let these ancient echoes fade, we're left with a richer understanding of the past, one that challenges us to learn from their successes and their failures. Because if there's one lesson history teaches us, it's that the past is never just a series of events, but a mirror reflecting the complexities of the human condition. As the early morning mist whispers through the valleys of ancient China, you find yourself stretching out the kinks from another night on a wooden bed. It's 500 BCE, smack dab in the middle of the Zhou dynasty, and if you're a bronze smith, you're waking up to a day that's anything but a stroll in the peach blossom park. Forget the romanticized visions of artisans leisurely crafting masterpieces under the serene gaze of distant mountains. Today is about the grit, grind, and the clang of metalwork that echoes through your bones. First things first, you shuffle to the workshop, the heart of your existence. You see, the life of a bronze smith isn't just about the artistry. It's a full-on metal marathon. Your day starts with the hunt for materials. Copper and tin are your bread and butter. Copper, your main squeeze, is abundant around the Yangtze River, but it's no walk in the rice paddy to extract. Then there's tin, the elusive partner in crime, often imported from places as far-flung as what's now Thailand. Talk about a long-distance relationship. Together, these metals form bronze, the star of the show. The ratio, roughly 9, one of copper to tin, a magical mix that creates the sturdy, yet malleable bronze that's been the backbone of Zhou metallurgy. As you gather your materials, you can't help but chuckle at the myth that artisans of your time lived lives of leisure. The reality is, you're more akin to a CrossFit enthusiast, lifting, hauling, and sweating under the sun. Working with bronze is less about poetic inspiration and more about brute strength and precision. Those delicate patterns and intricate designs on a ritual vessel, they come from hands calloused by hours of labor, a testament to both your skill and endurance. By mid-morning, your muscles are warmed up, and it's time to fire up the furnace. This isn't some modern-day appliance where you flick a switch and wait for the magic to happen. No, you're stoking the flames yourself, feeding it charcoal until the temperature hits around 1,000 degrees Celsius. That's nearly twice as hot as a pizza oven, and you're standing right next to it. Sweat equity takes on a new meaning here. Now let's talk about technique. The process called piece mold casting is your bread and butter. You start by crafting a clay model of whatever you're making, be it a ceremonial vessel or a simple tool. Then, you encase it in more clay, bake it till it's hard, and voila, you've got a mold. Once you break the model out, you're left with a hollow cavity perfect for your molten bronze. This isn't just about precision, it's about timing. Pour too fast, and you risk air bubbles, too slow, and the bronze cools too quickly. It's a dance with fire, literally and figuratively. As the afternoon sun climbs higher, you're knee-deep in the rhythm of casting, molding, and cooling. It's a process that demands your full attention, and there's no room for error. Mistakes mean wasted resources, an economic catastrophe in a time when every scrap of metal counts. Your workshop is a bustling hub, not just for you, but for the apprentices and fellow smiths who share your space. This isn't a solo gig, it's a community effort. You're part of a guild, a tightly knit group bound by both skill and secrecy. Your techniques are your trade secrets, guarded like the Emperor's treasure. Share them outside the guild, and you might as well cast yourself out alongside them. And speaking of emperors, let's not forget the political backdrop. The Zhou dynasty is a time of intense feudalism, where power plays and alliances are as fluid as the metals you work with. Your craft doesn't just serve the local lords, it reinforces their status, their power. Those bronze vessels adorned with intricate reliefs, they're symbols of authority, used in rituals that declare the divine right to rule. The better your work, the more it bolsters your patron's prestige. And let's be honest, a happy lord means a happy life, or at the very least, one where your head remains firmly attached to your shoulders. By the time the sun begins to dip below the horizon, you're wrapping up another day of toil. The myth of the leisurely artisan is as distant as the stars that are starting to prick the evening sky. You're a craftsman, yes, but also a laborer, a businessman, and a cog in the mighty wheel of Zhou society. As you wipe the sweat from your brow and head back home, you carry with you not just the physical exhaustion of the day, but the knowledge that your work fuels the very structure of your world. And maybe, just maybe, as you lay back down on that hard wooden bed, you dream not of leisure, but of legacy. After all, the tools, the vessels, and the weapons you create today might just be the artifacts that future generations will uncover, marveling at the skill and effort of those ancient Chinese bronze smiths who lived, worked, and thrived in the heart of the Zhou dynasty. As you drift off, the weight of your day's labor still clinging to your muscles like a persistent ghost, let's take a detour from the tangible to the economic currents swirling around your craft. The artistry of bronze work is more than a visual feast. It's a testament to an intricate web of economics, trade, and politics that makes modern-day supply chain management look like a game of hopscotch. Let's start with the cold, hard cash, or rather, the stones and shells that passed for currency in ancient China. Producing bronze wasn't a cheap endeavor. Copper and tin were the dynamic duo of the day, but they weren't exactly growing on trees. Extracting copper from the Yangtze's rich deposits was labor-intensive and costly. Tin, on the other hand, was the original long-haul trucker of the metal world, often making its way from distant lands like modern-day Thailand. Think of those tin traders as the ancient version of Amazon delivery drivers, but on foot, with a slight detour through treacherous terrain. The cost of bronze production meant that metal objects were the bling of the Zhou dynasty, status symbols for those lucky few who could afford them. A single bronze vessel could set you back more than a year's worth of grain, which, considering it was a staple diet, made it a serious investment. These weren't just your everyday pots and pans. They were ceremonial pieces, adorned with intricate designs that told stories as old as the hills. Owning one was akin to having a Picasso in your living room, something to brag about over the ancient equivalent of a dinner party. And let's not forget about trade networks. These were the original Silk Roads before they were cool. Traders didn't just deal in goods, they were the social media influencers of their day, spreading ideas, cultures, and technologies across vast distances. The network was as complex as a modern-day airport hub, with routes stretching across thousands of kilometers. Bronze objects played a double role here. They were both the cargo and the currency, items of trade that were as valuable as the goods they were exchanged for. Now, let's get political. The Zhou dynasty's power plays would make House of Cards look like a children's puppet show. Metallurgy wasn't just a means to craft pretty objects. It was a political tool, literally and figuratively. Bronze weapons equipped armies that were the backbone of feudal lords' power. If you were a ruler worth your salt, you needed a well-armed militia to keep your vassals in check, and bronze was your golden ticket, or bronze ticket, if you will. The political clout of bronze extended beyond the battlefield. Those ornately decorated vessels we mentioned, they were the stage props in the theater of divine right. Rituals involving these objects weren't just religious acts. They were political statements, reinforcing the social order and the ruler's place at its top. The better your bronze, the more legitimate your rule seemed. It's the ancient equivalent of having a blue checkmark next to your name, validation that you had the power and prestige to back up your claims. So, as you lay in the dark, contemplating the day's efforts, remember that your work isn't just about crafting tools and trinkets. It's about shaping the very fabric of society. Each cast, each mold, is a building block in the architecture of power, economy, and culture. You might be one cog in the wheel, but it's a wheel that carries the weight of a civilization. And that's no small feat, even if your muscles would beg to differ as you drift off to sleep. The night may be still, but the echoes of your hammering resonate through the corridors of time, a testament to the industrious spirit of ancient China. As the morning sun prepares to rise on another day, bringing with it the promise of more metalwork and less leisure, take solace in the fact that your legacy is forged in the fires of history, one bronze artifact at a time. As the morning sun prepares to rise on another day, bringing with it the promise of more metalwork and less leisure, take solace in the fact that your legacy is forged in the fires of history, one bronze artifact at a time. But hey, before we get too misty-eyed about the romance of ancient China, let's grab a bite, figuratively speaking, and dive headfirst into the technological marvel that is lost wax casting. Now, if you're imagining an ancient artisan delicately crafting wax sculptures under the shade of a cherry blossom tree, hold that thought. The reality is more like a high-stakes science experiment with a side of artistry. Lost wax casting, or Saya Perdue, if you're feeling fancy and French, is the unsung hero of ancient metalwork. It's the technique that takes your bronze game from meh to masterful. Here's the skinny. You start by sculpting a model of your intended object in wax. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of 3D printing, but with a lot more elbow grease and a lot less digital wizardry. This wax model is then encased in clay or a similar mold material. Once that's all set, you heat the ensemble until the wax melts away, leaving a cavity where your model once was. The next step is where the magic, or rather the metallurgy, happens. Molten bronze is poured into this cavity, filling the space left by the wax. Once cooled, the clay is broken away to reveal the bronze object, a perfect replica of your original model. It's a bit like baking a cake, except the ingredients are way harder and slightly more lethal. This method allows for intricate designs, the kind that would make a tattoo artist weep with envy. Now, let's bust a myth into tiny smithereens. While we might daydream about these techniques being solely for crafting ornate ritual vessels and fine art, the truth is far more pragmatic. Lost wax casting was revolutionary not just because it made pretty things, but because it was a game changer for producing weapons and agricultural tools. In ancient China, life wasn't all tea ceremonies and poetry recitals. It was also about survival, power, and productivity. Take weapons, for instance. A finely cast bronze sword or spearhead wasn't just a symbol of status. It was a necessity for survival in a tumultuous world. The Zhou dynasty wasn't a peaceful utopia. It was a patchwork of states often at odds with one another, and a well-crafted weapon could mean the difference between life and death. Lost wax casting allowed for more sophisticated weapon designs, sharper edges, better balance, and intricate detailing that could intimidate as much as it could impale. And let's not forget the humble agricultural tool. While it doesn't have the glamorous allure of a warrior's sword, the plowshare was just as critical. Innovations in metalworking meant more efficient plows, which in turn meant more food production. More food meant a larger population, which meant a bigger workforce, which meant, you guessed it, more metal to be worked. See how this all comes full circle. Ripple effects of these technological advances transformed not just the battlefield, but the very fabric of daily life. Historical records give us a glimpse into how these advancements affected the day-to-day. Imagine being a farmer in ancient China, your livelihood dependent on the whims of weather and soil. A newly minted bronze plowshare could turn your luck around, allowing you to till tougher soil and plant more crops. Suddenly, you're not just scraping by, you're thriving. Your surplus might be traded for other goods, perhaps even some of that elusive tin needed for more bronze. It's a metal-driven cycle of prosperity, a Bronze Age economic boom, if you will. But let's not get too carried away with the idea of a perfect bronze utopia. The reality was still a grind. Working with bronze was laborious, dangerous, and often left those involved with more than a few scars. The fumes from the furnaces alone were enough to make a modern-day OSHA inspector's head spin. And yet, despite the risks, the drive to innovate, to create something enduring, was irresistible. It's the same spirit that fuels inventors and creators today, the desire to leave a mark, to craft something that transcends the everyday grind. Of course, the romantic notion of the solitary artisan toiling away in noble solitude is just as much a fantasy as the idea that these techniques were solely for art's sake. In reality, metalwork was a collaborative effort, a community affair with each person playing a crucial role. From the miners who dug the raw materials out of the earth, to the traders who transported them across vast distances, to the smiths who transformed them into objects of utility and beauty. It was a chain of collaboration and interdependence. And speaking of interdependence, let's talk about the economic web spun by these innovations. In a world where barter was the name of the game, metal objects were a universal currency of sorts. Bronze wasn't just a metal, it was a medium of exchange, a way to measure wealth and power. The sheer value of bronze objects meant they could be used to settle debts, pay for goods, or even as tribute to powerful rulers. It's a reminder that while art and beauty are nice, economics and practicality often call the shots. As we wrap up this chapter of our journey into ancient Chinese metalworking, it's clear that the story is far from over. The innovations in metallurgy weren't just technical achievements. They were catalysts for economic, social, and political change. They laid the groundwork for the advances that would follow, shaping the world in ways those ancient smiths might never have imagined. So, as you take a step back into the present, remember that each artifact, each tool, each weapon was a part of a larger story, a story of ingenuity, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of progress. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in this saga of metal, might, and mastery. Let's keep this historical joyride rolling, shall we? As the afternoon sun casts long shadows over the Zhou dynasty, we pivot from the clanging forges to the society shaped by them. Metallurgy wasn't just about creating shiny objects. It was a cornerstone of social hierarchy and cultural practices. Think of it as the ancient version of a social media influencer. It could make or break reputations, dictate trends, and even decide who sat at the cool kids' table, metaphorically speaking. Now, let's talk social hierarchy. In ancient China, bronze wasn't just metal. It was a status symbol, a physical embodiment of power and prestige. Owning a finely crafted bronze vessel was akin to driving a luxury car today. It said, "I've made it," without uttering a single word. The ruling elite, the aristocrats, were the main patrons of bronze artisans. They commissioned works that were as much about utility as they were about asserting dominance. These objects were displayed at banquets and rituals, silently shouting the owner's wealth and influence. But it wasn't just about who had the fanciest tableware. Bronze also played a part in maintaining social norms through burial practices. Let's dive 6 feet under, figuratively, of course, and explore the world of Zhou dynasty burials. In those days, the afterlife was a continuation of this life, meaning you needed all your earthly comforts on the other side. The elite were buried with bronze objects that ranged from weapons to ritual vessels. Tombs were like ancient resumes, showcasing one's status and accomplishments. Picture this. You're a nobleman preparing for the big sleep, and your tomb is decked out with bronze bells, mirrors, and maybe even a chariot if you were particularly well-to-do. These weren't just grave goods. They were your ticket to maintaining your social standing in the afterlife. It's a bit like packing for a trip, except the destination is eternity. The lavishness of your burial could secure your family's reputation for generations, ensuring your descendants didn't slip down the social ladder. Now, speaking of legends, let's tackle the myths surrounding master artisans. You've heard the tales, right? Stories of craftsmen with godlike abilities who could breathe life into metal, turning raw ore into masterpieces with a mere flick of the wrist. Romantic, sure, but let's pop that bubble. These artisans were highly skilled, no doubt, but their magical abilities were grounded in rigorous training, not mysticism. They were the engineers of their time, combining a deep understanding of materials with innovative techniques. Take the famous Gan Jiang and Mo Yi, legendary swordsmiths whose names still echo through the corridors of history. Legends say they infused their souls into their blades, creating weapons of unparalleled sharpness and strength. The reality. These masters of metallurgy likely spent years honing their craft, learning to manipulate temperatures and alloys to create superior swords. Their magic was in their precise control of the metal's properties, not some arcane ritual. But hey, who doesn't love a good legend? These stories held cultural significance, serving as allegories for dedication and excellence. They were the ancient world's motivational posters, inspiring young apprentices to strive for greatness. The romantic tales of mystical prowess added a touch of allure to the often gritty, back-breaking work of metalworking. It's a testament to human nature, our ability to find poetry in the mundane and inspiration in the sweat of our brows. As we delve deeper into the social tapestry woven by metallurgy, let's not forget the economic undercurrents that kept the loom spinning. Bronze objects weren't just symbols of status. They were economic assets. In a world where barter was king, these metal masterpieces were as good as gold. They could be traded for grain, livestock, or even political favors. The value of bronze was a stabilizing force in the economy, providing a measure of wealth that transcended the volatility of crops and cattle. And let's talk about the unsung heroes of this narrative, the artisans themselves. These craftsmen were the blue-collar backbone of society, their work fueling the engines of economy and culture. But unlike today's celebrity chefs or tech moguls, they toiled in relative anonymity. Their creations spoke for them, each piece a testament to their skill and dedication. In a way, they were the original influencers, shaping trends and tastes from behind the scenes. So, as we wrap up this afternoon exploration of metallurgy's broader impacts, remember that the legacy of ancient Chinese metalworking is more than just shimmering artifacts in a museum. It's a story of power, politics, and the pursuit of prestige. It's a narrative where legends and reality intertwine, each enriching the other. And as the sun sets on this chapter, know that we've only scratched the surface of this metal-clad saga. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come in this tale of history, heft, and a healthy dose of heat. As the shadows lengthen and the air cools, let's take a step back and admire the sprawling tapestry of ancient Chinese metalworking, a scene that's as intricate as the bronze vessels themselves. We've been on quite the historical joyride, haven't we? From the sweat-soaked workshops of Zhou Dynasty bronze smiths to the political machinations that made Game of Thrones look like a friendly neighborhood dispute. But here we are, at the edge of twilight, ready to connect the dots between the clang of ancient hammers and the sleek hum of modern metallurgy. Buckle up, because this is where the past meets the present in a glorious, molten collision. Now, if you're thinking that ancient Chinese metalworking is just a quaint relic from history's attic, think again. The innovations of those early artisans have left an indelible mark on today's metal industry. Take the lost wax casting technique we chatted about earlier. This wasn't just a historical footnote. It was the grandeur of modern investment casting. That's right. Without those ancient wax models, you wouldn't have the precision parts that power everything from jet engines to medical implants today. It's like the Zhou Dynasty reached through time and gave modern manufacturing a high five. And speaking of high fives, let's not forget about the alloys. The Bronze Age wasn't just a catchy name. It was an era defined by the cunning combination of copper and tin. Fast forward a few thousand years, and those same principles of alloying are at the heart of modern metallurgy. Whether it's stainless steel or titanium alloys, the concept remains. Mix metals to get the best of both worlds. The ancient Chinese were the OG metallurgists, their work proving that sometimes two metals really are better than one. Take that, alchemy. But wait, there's more. Consider the economic implications of metalworking that still reverberate today. Back then, bronze was currency, status symbol, and power tool all rolled into one. Today, metals continue to be the backbone of global economies. The price of copper can still send financial markets into a tizzy, and rare earth metals, often sourced from China, by the way, are the new gold rush, critical to everything from smartphones to electric vehicles. It's a testament to metal's staying power, its ability to shape not just tools and weapons, but entire economies. History may not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. Now, let's tackle some myths head-on, like a blacksmith hammering out impurities. The romantic image of the lone genius artisan, pure fantasy. Those ancient workshops were bustling hives of activity, collaboration, and yes, a fair bit of secrecy. Techniques were guarded jealously, knowledge passed down like precious heirlooms. The truth is, These artisans were more akin to modern startup founders, balancing innovation with the harsh realities of economics and competition. It's a reminder that even the most lauded geniuses rarely work alone, standing instead on the shoulders of their peers and predecessors. As for the mystical aura that often surrounds ancient craftsmanship, let's give it a reality check. Sure, there's a certain poetry in imagining that these smiths were divining secrets from the metal itself, but the truth is, their skills were honed through years of trial and error, sweat and soot. Even today, the most advanced technologies owe as much to hard-earned experience as they do to scientific breakthroughs. It's not about magic, it's about mastery, the kind that's earned through grit and determination. And speaking of determination, let's not gloss over the social implications of ancient metallurgy. Those bronze objects were more than just pretty things. They were instruments of power and control. The crafting of metal wasn't a neutral act. It was deeply political, a way to reinforce hierarchies and maintain order. It's a sobering reminder that technology, no matter how advanced, is always wielded by human hands, with all the complexities and contradictions that entails. So as we dim the lights on our journey through ancient Chinese metalworking, let's reflect on the legacy left behind. These artisans may not have foreseen the sprawling cities, the skyscrapers of steel and glass, or the intricate circuitry of modern devices, but their work laid the foundation for it all. They were pioneers, their hammers echoing through the ages, a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless drive to create and innovate. But here's the kicker. While it's easy to romanticize the past, to put those ancient artisans on pedestals, let's not forget the reality of their world. It was a world of hard labor and harsh conditions, of political intrigue and economic necessity. Their legacy isn't one of untarnished glory. It's one of resilience, of making do with what they had and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. It's a legacy that reminds us of the power of human creativity, even in the face of adversity. And so, as you settle into the evening, perhaps with a newfound appreciation for the Bronze Age and its ripple effects through history, remember this. The story of ancient Chinese metalworking is a story of humanity itself. It's a narrative of ingenuity and endurance, of myth and reality, interwoven in a dance as old as time. So next time you admire a piece of metalwork, whether ancient or modern, take a moment to appreciate the centuries of knowledge, the countless hands, and the indomitable spirit behind it. Because in the end, that's the true legacy of those ancient smiths, a legacy forged in fire, tempered by time, and carried forward by each of us. In the dark tunnels of medieval Europe, where sunlight was a fable and fresh air was a rare luxury, miners lived a life that was, quite literally, beneath everyone else. Forget about the romanticized image of robust men, heroically battling the earth with gleaming pickaxes. The truth is far grimmer, and frankly, a bit grimy. Step into the shoes, or more accurately, the worn-out boots, of a medieval miner, and you're stepping into a world where every day is a gamble with fate. These were the folks who thought it was a great idea to spend their days burrowing into the earth, armed with little more than a pickaxe and sheer grit. Picture this. The year is 1350, and if you're a German miner, you're probably in the Harz Mountains, digging away in the hope of striking silver. Let's be honest. Mining might be a generous term for what these folks were doing. They were more like subterranean scramblers, working in tunnels so tight that claustrophobia wasn't just a fear, it was a reality. Now, I know what you're thinking. What could possibly compel someone to spend their days chipping away in the dark, breathing in dust, and hoping that today isn't the day the shaft collapses? Well, my friend, it was all about the shiny stuff. Silver, primarily, but also tin, copper, and sometimes gold if you were lucky, or unlucky, considering the risks. The economic allure was undeniable. In the medieval economy, metals were the real currency, and miners were the rock stars of the resource extraction world, albeit without the groupies or the glam. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Put down your imaginary pickaxe for a second and consider the working conditions. The tools, rudimentary, to say the least. No power drills or safety helmets here, just hand-forged iron tools that were as much a threat to the user as they were to the rock. And those tools didn't come cheap. A pickaxe could set you back several weeks' wages, a significant investment for someone who might not even see the next payday. Once underground, the hazard list read like a medieval horror story. Cave-ins, Flooding and toxic gases were just a few of the delightful surprises awaiting these earth dwellers. The tunnels were often little more than barely reinforced burrows, prone to collapse at the slightest provocation. Miners worked in near-total darkness, relying on dim candlelight that only added to the danger by increasing the risk of fire. As for ventilation, well, let's just say it was more of an afterthought than a priority. Miners inhaled dust and fumes that would make even a modern coal miner wheeze in sympathy. Those fumes, by the way, weren't always harmless. There's a reason they called it bad air, or choke damp. Carbon dioxide and methane were frequent guests, silently waiting to turn a hard day's work into a deadly one. It turns out that digging into the bowels of the earth is a bit like poking a sleeping dragon. There's always a chance it might wake up and take offense. Socially, miners were woven into a peculiar fabric. While they held a certain rugged respect for their ability to extract wealth from the earth, they were also seen as rough, unrefined individuals, not the type you'd invite to a nightly banquet. Yeah, they were crucial to the medieval economy, fueling the mints that struck coins and the industries that crafted tools and weaponry. So why did anyone sign up for this gig? Well, it wasn't all doom and gloom. For starters, there was the potential for wealth. A successful miner could earn enough to live comfortably, maybe even buy a small plot of land. Plus, in some regions, mining communities were self-governing, offering a level of independence unheard of in the feudal system. Think of it as a medieval version of a workers' co-op, where miners had a say in their own affairs, a small taste of democracy in a world dominated by lords and kings. But here's a twist. Many miners were actually serfs or peasants who had fled from the oppressive yoke of the feudal system. The mines offered a kind of sanctuary. Sure, it was a sanctuary with collapsing ceilings and air that could kill you, but at least it was free of lords demanding taxes and tithes. In regions like Bohemia, where silver mining boomed, entire towns sprang up around these mines, creating bustling centers of trade and industry. Of course, the reality was never as golden as the metals they sought. For every miner who struck it rich, there were countless others who never made it out of the mines alive. It was a roll of the dice, a gamble that many were willing to take in the hope of a better life. And therein lies the paradox. Mining was a ticket to potential freedom and prosperity, yet it was bound by chains of danger and hardship. And while we've all heard the tales of gold rushes and treasure troves, the true story of medieval mining is a testament to human endurance and folly. These miners weren't just extracting minerals. They were digging through layers of social and economic strata, all in pursuit of a glimmer of hope, however dimly it might flicker in the candlelit gloom of their underground world. In the end, it's a story as much about the lure of wealth as it is about the resilience of those who sought it. It's about the shadows cast by flickering flames in dark tunnels and the dreams of those who dared to chase them. So the next time you handle a shiny coin or a piece of jewelry, spare a thought for the medieval miner who, against all odds, might have helped to bring it into the world. Now, speaking of coins, let's talk about how those shiny little discs could make or break a medieval miner's life. First off, if you think payday excitement is a modern phenomenon, think again. For medieval miners, payday was practically a festival, except instead of confetti, there was probably a lot of coughing up dust. We've got to get real about numbers here. On a good day, a skilled miner might rake in about 2 to 3 groschen. Now, before you start dreaming of medieval bling, let's put that into perspective. Groschen were like the pennies of the medieval economy. A loaf of bread could set you back about 1 groschen, and that's if the harvest hadn't gone sideways, sending grain prices through the roof. You see, those pay packets didn't stretch far, especially when you've got a family to feed and a roof to keep over your head, a roof that wasn't collapsing, preferably. And speaking of that roof, let's not forget the cost of living. Rent was another beast entirely. In a bustling mining town like Cathedral in Bohemia, one of the medieval mining hotspots, you were looking at shelling out up to half your monthly wages just to keep from sleeping next to your pickaxe in the mine. That's not even mentioning the exorbitant cost of keeping your pickaxe sharp and ready to battle the earth. Remember that pickaxe we talked about? Well, if you didn't feel like splurging on a new one, you'd better be ready to fork over a groschen or two to the local blacksmith for repairs. It was like the medieval version of car maintenance, but with more soot and fewer spare parts. Debt was the shadow lurking behind every miner, much like the ever-present threat of a cave-in. Payday loans might seem like a modern curse, but medieval miners were no strangers to borrowing against their future earnings. They'd often find themselves owing more to the company's store than they brought home. It was a classic case of the house always winning, except the house was a drafty shack, and the winnings were a few coins that barely jingled. Now, if you're thinking the mine owners were the medieval equivalent of Scrooge McDuck, swimming in pools of silver and gold, you'd be spot on. While miners scraped by on meager wages, the owners were the ones pocketing the real profits. These guys weren't just businessmen. They were the medieval moguls, the titans of industry who knew how to turn a profit from the sweat and toil of others. For them, the risk of a mine collapse was just a line item in the ledger, an unfortunate but acceptable cost of doing business. It wasn't just the miners who felt the economic squeeze. Entire local economies were built around the mines, and they ebbed and flowed with the whims of fortune that came from beneath the earth. Towns like Goslar in the Harz Mountains or Jakimov in Bohemia were mining boomtowns, their fortunes tied to the success or failure of the mines. When the silver veins ran rich, everyone from tavern keepers to cobblers thrived. When they dried up, the entire town could find itself on the brink of collapse, like a medieval version of a factory town after a closure. For many miners, the prospect of wealth was like the carrot on a stick, always just out of reach. They gambled their lives with each swing of the pickaxe, hoping to hit a motherlode that could catapult them out of poverty. But in reality, striking it rich was like winning the medieval lottery. It happened, sure, but for every lucky draw, there were countless others whose only reward was a back bent with toil and a short, harsh life. But hey, let's not throw all romance out with the dust. The idea of mining was appealing, like the medieval version of being an astronaut, risky, mysterious, and potentially lucrative. It was a high-stakes game, and for some, the allure of fortune was enough to make the constant gamble worth it. After all, what's life without a little danger, right? Yet, the harsh reality was that the odds were stacked against them, and for many, the gamble ended not with riches, but with ruin. Mining wasn't just about individual fortunes or failures. It was a microcosm of medieval society's structural inequalities. The few who owned the mines climbed higher on the social ladder, their wealth solidifying their power and influence. Meanwhile, the miners remained trapped at the bottom, literally and figuratively, their lives dictated by the whims of those above. As we dig deeper into the story of medieval mining, it's crucial to remember that these miners were more than just cogs in a vast economic machine. They were real people, with dreams of a better life, caught in a system that was as unforgiving as the earth they chipped away at day after day. Their struggles and sacrifices laid the foundations for the wealth of nations, even if they themselves saw little of that prosperity. So, the next time you marvel at a piece of medieval art or a relic from that era, consider the hidden stories of those who toiled in the dark to make it all possible. The miners were the unsung heroes of their time, enduring unimaginable hardships for the chance of a better tomorrow, an enduring testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. And while their stories may be buried in history, their impact is as lasting as the metals they unearthed, woven into the very fabric of our modern world. Stay tuned as we continue to uncover the layers of their lives, revealing the complex tapestry of history that shaped them, and us, in ways we're only beginning to understand. As we peel back the layers of history, it's clear that medieval miners were not just battling the earth. They were also navigating a social and political labyrinth that would make even the most cunning Game of Thrones plotline look straightforward. The medieval mining world was a cauldron of power dynamics, where muscle and might met money and influence, with miners often caught in the crossfire. Let's set the scene. Imagine the ruling elite, clad in their finery, sitting comfortably above ground, while below, miners are toiling away in the dark. These elite weren't just passively raking in profits. They were active players in a high-stakes game of control. Mine owners were often wealthy merchants or even members of the nobility, wielding their financial clout like a medieval version of a hedge fund manager. It's like they were the original venture capitalists, except instead of investing in tech startups, they were betting on the gritty business of resource extraction. But here's the kicker. Miners weren't just passive participants in this drama. They were well aware of their importance to the economy and occasionally tried to leverage it. In some regions, miners banded together, forming proto-unions to advocate for better conditions and fairer wages. Think of it as the medieval miners' version of the labor movement, minus the placards and megaphones, and with a lot more dirt under the fingernails. Take the mining town of Freiburg in Saxony, for example. By the late 12th century, miners there had managed to carve out a degree of autonomy, establishing their own laws and regulations. It was like a mini-republic, albeit one where democracy came with a side of soot. These early attempts at organization were a testament to the miners' resilience and ingenuity, a flicker of collective power in a world dominated by individual wealth. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. The ruling elite weren't exactly keen on sharing their power or profits. They responded to miners' attempts at organizing with the kind of brutal efficiency that would make a medieval despot proud. Crackdowns were common, with miners often facing fines, imprisonment, or worse. It was a stark reminder of who really held the reins of power. In one notorious incident in 1525, during the German Peasants' War, miners from the Mansfeld region joined forces with peasants to demand better conditions. The response: the ruling class swiftly and violently quashed the rebellion, leaving a trail of bloodied bodies and shattered hopes. It was a brutal lesson in the risks of challenging the status quo, underscoring the harsh reality that, in the medieval world, dissent was often a death sentence. Yet the miners' struggle wasn't just about survival. It was about dignity. They wanted recognition for their contribution to society, a society that depended on the metals they unearthed. In a world where social mobility was about as rare as a unicorn sighting, the mines offered a glimmer of hope. For some, striking it rich could mean a ticket out of the class they were born into. For others, it was simply about making enough to keep the wolf from the door. The power dynamics didn't stop at the mine owners and miners. The church, ever the opportunist, also had its fingers in the pie. Monasteries and ecclesiastical authorities often held significant mining interests, viewing the wealth of the earth as divinely ordained. After all, why stop at spiritual wealth when you can have material wealth too? It was a divine irony that the very institutions preaching humility and piety were often deeply invested in the dirty business of mining. This tangled web of interests ensured that miners were caught in a perpetual tug-of-war. Their attempts at organization were a constant push against a system that was designed to keep them in their place. It was a narrative as old as time, the struggle between the haves and the have-nots, the powerful and the powerless. But let's not romanticize this struggle too much. While miners did occasionally manage to eke out concessions, their victories were often short-lived. The scales of power remained tipped firmly in favor of those with the gold, both literal and metaphorical. Yet, these early labor movements laid the groundwork for future generations, a legacy of resistance that echoes through history. So, what does this all mean? Well, it paints a picture of a world where the glow of silver and gold cast long shadows, where the promise of wealth was both a dream and a trap. It was a society built on the backs of those who dared to dig deep, risking life and limb for a chance at something better. As we continue to dig into this story, remember that the miners of the medieval world were more than just workers. They were dreamers, rebels, and survivors. Their tales are woven into the very fabric of history, a testament to the enduring human spirit and its relentless pursuit of a brighter future. And while their voices may have been silenced by the weight of history, their legacy lives on, buried in the dust and darkness of the mines they once called home. Now that we've peeled back the layers of medieval mining life, let's ditch the rose-colored glasses entirely. Sure, there was a certain allure to the idea of mining, danger, mystery, potential riches. But the reality was more like a medieval horror show. If you were hoping for a life of adventure and intrigue, you'd be more likely to find yourself as the star of a grim, cautionary tale. First off, let's talk about health hazards. If you thought modern-day miners had it rough, wait until you hear about their medieval counterparts. Forget hard hats and ventilators. These guys had nothing more than a cloth tied over their mouths in hopes that the air didn't kill them before payday. The average miner's life expectancy: a bleak 30 to 35 years, if you were lucky. That's right, you were basically a senior citizen by the time you hit your mid-30s. And what about the charming little ailments they faced? Ever heard of miner's lung? It's a delightful condition caused by inhaling copious amounts of dust. Basically, the medieval equivalent of smoking a pack a day, except your cigarette, was the mine itself. Add to that the constant threat of silicosis and tuberculosis, and you've got yourself a medical nightmare. It's no wonder miners were known for their persistent coughs. Think chain smoker, but with more grit and grime. But the hazards weren't just physical. Oh no, the mental toll was just as severe. Imagine spending your days in near-complete darkness, with only a flickering candle to light your way. It's enough to drive anyone a little batty. In fact, many miners suffered from what we might today call claustrophobia or even depression. After all, when your world is a cramped tunnel and your best friend is a pickaxe, existential dread tends to creep in. But let's not forget the superstitions. Miners were a superstitious bunch, and who could blame them? When you spend your days battling the earth, it's only natural to look for a little divine intervention. Enter the quirky rituals and traditions that miners follow to ward off bad luck. For starters, many believed in the existence of narkers, or tamanarkers, mischievous spirits said to dwell in the mines. Supposedly, these little guys would make knocking sounds to warn miners of impending cave-ins. Of course, if things went south, you could always blame the narkers for slacking off on the job. And then there were the rituals. Before entering a mine, some miners would perform small acts of superstition, like spitting on the ground or reciting prayers. It was a way to appease the spirits and ensure a safe day's work, or at the very least, to feel like you had some control over your fate. In some regions, miners even carried lucky charms or wore special clothing thought to protect them from harm. It was like a medieval version of carrying a rabbit's foot, but with more soot and less fluff. But here's the kicker. While these traditions might seem quaint or even charming, they were born out of sheer desperation. When your life is at the mercy of forces beyond your control, sometimes a little superstition is all you have to cling to. It's a testament to the human spirit's relentless pursuit of hope, even in the darkest of tunnels. And speaking of tunnels, let's talk about the architectural marvels, if you can call them that, crafted by medieval miners. Picture this. You're burrowing into the earth with nothing more than a pickaxe and a prayer. The tunnels were often so narrow that miners had to crawl on their hands and knees with little more than a candle to light the way. It was like spelunking, but without any of the fun or safety equipment. The risk of a cave-in was ever present, turning each shift into a gamble with death. And who could forget the delightful experience of flooding? There you are, chipping away at rock, when suddenly you're ankle-deep in water. Without modern pumps, miners were left to bail out water by hand, hoping to keep their heads above water, literally and figuratively. But let's not lose sight of the romance entirely. Yes, mining was brutal, dangerous, and often deadly, but it also held a certain allure. The promise of striking it rich, of finding that elusive vein of silver or gold, was enough to draw people in like moths to a flame. It was a high-stakes game, a thrilling chase that kept miners coming back for more, despite the odds. And then there was the camaraderie. In the darkness of the mines, bonds were forged that could withstand the weight of the world, quite literally. Miners relied on each other for survival, creating a sense of community that was as strong as the rock they chipped away at. It was a brotherhood of sorts, united by the shared struggle against the earth and the relentless pursuit of something better. So while the tale of the medieval miner is one of hardship and danger, it's also a story of resilience and hope. It's about the human spirit's unwavering determination to chase dreams, no matter how elusive they might be. And as we continue to delve into this story, let's remember that these miners were more than just workers. They were dreamers, rebels, and survivors, leaving a legacy that echoes through the ages. Hold onto your hard hats, because we're not done yet. There's more to uncover in the depths of the medieval mining world, and trust me, the story only gets richer from here. And just when you thought we'd hit rock bottom, let's unearth the real treasure here, the legacy of medieval mining. You might be wondering, what's the big deal about a bunch of guys with pickaxes, anyway? Well, strap on your metaphorical hard hat, because the impact of these subterranean scramblers goes deeper than any silver vein they ever struck. First off, let's talk innovation. Yes, those rudimentary tools were clunky and dangerous, but they were also the precursors to modern mining technology. Medieval miners were the original DIY enthusiasts, constantly tinkering to improve their methods. The water wheel, for instance, wasn't just for idyllic mill scenes. It was put to work pumping water out of mines. This early use of mechanized power was just a stone's throw from the Industrial Revolution. Imagine the thrill of figuring out that you could use water to fight water. It's like a medieval MacGyver episode, minus the mullet. But there's more to the story. Mining wasn't just about extracting minerals. It was about extracting potential from the earth itself. The wealth pulled from those mines helped fuel the burgeoning economies of Europe. Silver from places like the Harz Mountains and Bohemia didn't just stay local. It flowed into the veins of trade routes, helping to finance everything from wars to the lavish lifestyles of the elite. It's no exaggeration to say that these miners were unwittingly setting the stage for the rise of Europe as an economic powerhouse. Talk about digging deep for glory. Let's not forget the ripple effect on industry. Mining towns became hubs of innovation, where metallurgy and alchemy intersected. The demand for better tools and techniques spurred advancements in metalworking, laying the groundwork for future industries. Those blacksmiths repairing pickaxes, they were the ancestors of modern engineers, constantly innovating to meet the demands of a rapidly changing world. It's like the ultimate game of cause and effect, with each swing of the pickaxe reverberating through the centuries. Now, let's zoom out a bit. The social impact of mining is as significant as its economic one. Mining communities often operated with a level of autonomy unheard of in the feudal system, setting precedents for self-governance. These proto-democratic environments were microcosms of a more egalitarian society, albeit ones where everyone was equally likely to get a lungful of dust. The notion that common folk could have a say in their own affairs was a radical idea, one that would gradually seep into the broader currents of history, leading to the democratic ideals we hold dear today. And to think it all started in the confines of a cramped, dark tunnel. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The reality was that for every nugget of progress, there was a hefty price in human suffering. The human cost of mining was enormous, a stark reminder that progress often leaves a trail of casualties in its wake. The average miner was a casualty of his own ambition, caught in a system that promised much but delivered little. It's the age-old story of the exploited worker, one that's as relevant today as it was in the 14th century. The struggle for fair wages and safe working conditions is a thread that runs through history, and medieval mining is a poignant chapter in that ongoing saga. And what about the environmental impact? Picture this. Entire landscapes scarred by mining operations, forests cleared for timber, and waterways polluted by runoff. Sound familiar? Medieval mining was the precursor to the environmental challenges we face today. It's a sobering reminder that our modern world is built on the foundations laid by our ancestors, for better or worse. The scars on the landscape are a testament to humanity's relentless quest for progress, a double-edged sword that cuts deep. So, what's the takeaway from all this? Well, the story of medieval mining is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of innovation, exploitation, and resilience. It's a narrative that challenges us to reflect on the human cost of progress, to weigh the pursuit of wealth against the toll it takes on people and the planet. It's a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a living legacy that continues to shape our world. As we wrap up this journey through the dark, dusty tunnels of the past, let's pause for a moment to appreciate the miners who, despite the odds, dared to dig deep. Their legacy is etched into the fabric of our society, a testament to the indomitable human spirit that refuses to be buried. And as we face our own challenges in the modern world, perhaps there's a lesson to be learned from these medieval miners. That true progress is not just about what we extract from the earth, but what we build for the future. So the next time you hold a coin, spare a thought for the countless hands that toiled in the dark to bring it to light. It's a small token of a legacy that runs deeper than any mine shaft, a legacy that continues to shape our world in ways we are only beginning to understand. And with that, dear listener, we close the book on medieval mining. It's been a journey of grit and grime, of dreams and despair, but most importantly, of the enduring impact of those who dared to venture beneath the surface. Until next time, keep digging for the truth, because history is full of hidden gems waiting to be uncovered. Here you are, eyes fluttering open to the sound of roosters clucking their morning sonata in the heart of ancient Athens. Not exactly the Spotify playlist you might have chosen, but hey, it's a classic. As you stretch out on your hard, wooden bed, because comfort is for the weak, right? You're greeted by the scent of breakfast wafting through the air. It's barley bread and honey again, the breakfast of legends and commoners alike. While it might not be avocado toast, does the job of fueling you up for a day steeped in history and hierarchy. Now, let's face it, Athens isn't all olive crowns and philosophical debates. Sure, Socrates might be roaming around, ready to question everything from your choice of sandals to the meaning of life. But there's also a stark social divide you can't ignore. As a citizen, you've got rights, privileges, and the freedom to spend your day discussing democracy in the agora or flexing at the gymnasium. Meanwhile, slaves, who make up about a third of the population, are busy keeping this city running. They're the invisible engines driving the Athenian dream, minus the glitzy Instagram posts. Speaking of the gymnasium, you're thinking of heading there later. It's not just about staying fit. It's a social hub where politics, philosophy, and the occasional scandal meet sweat and sand. Think of it as an ancient combination of a CrossFit gym and a TED talk. But first, let's talk about the economics of slavery, as it's a topic that's both fascinating and unsettling. In Athens, owning a slave is a status symbol, a sign that you've made it, or at least you're pretending to. The price tag, about 200 drachmas for a skilled slave. That's no pocket change. To put it in perspective, a skilled worker might earn a drachma a day, so forking out 200 is like buying a luxury car today. And just like with a car, maintenance is key. Food, clothing, and occasional bribes make owning a slave a costly affair. But don't be fooled into thinking all slaves are treated equally. Far from it. Some are domestic servants, practically part of the family, while others toil in the silver mines, where life expectancy is brutally short. It's these harsh realities that often get glossed over in the romanticized tales of ancient glory. You might imagine Athens as a beacon of democracy, yet it's built on the backs of those who have no say in their own lives. So, breakfast downed, it's time to wander the bustling streets. You're off to meet the gang at the gymnasium, where flexing biceps is as much about politics as it is about physique. Picture this, a sandy courtyard filled with men in various stages of philosophical conversation, all while breaking a sweat. Here, you don't just build muscle, you build connections. Important discussions about the state of the city, recent wars, or the scandalous behavior of a rival city-state take place here. It's part fitness regime, part social networking, and all testosterone. Meanwhile, the slaves are busy with their own daily rituals, albeit far less glamorous ones. They prepare meals, tend to the children, and run errands. Their lives are governed by their master's whims, and any step out of line can result in harsh punishment. It's a world of stark contrasts, where the distance between freedom and servitude is both physical and psychological. Yet, amidst the sweat and the sand, you can't help but reflect on the paradox of Athens. This city, which prides itself on intellectual freedom and democratic ideals, is also a society deeply entrenched in inequality and oppression. It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of contradictions and complexities. So, as you head into the afternoon, remember that while you might be living the Athenian dream, there's a sobering reality that shadows its every step. And as the sun climbs higher, so too does your curiosity about what lies ahead in this city of ancient wonder and modern-day reflections. So, as you stroll toward the agora, clutching your barley bread like it's a €5 coffee, the heart of Athenian life beats louder with every step. The agora is where the magic and the mess of democracy happens. Picture a marketplace where ideas are as much for sale as olives and pottery. But hold your applause for democracy. Only about 30,000 of Athens' 300,000 residents get to wear the badge of citizen, and that includes women who are as politically relevant as a sock with a hole in it. That's a mere 10% of the population who have any say in the political playground. Now, before you start romanticizing this democratic utopia, let's break down the exclusivity. To be eligible to vote, you've got to be a free male, over 18, and born of Athenian parents. And no, you can't just roll into town and claim citizenship like you would a lost umbrella. This was a club with a strict door policy. It's kind of like trying to get into a swanky VIP section of a club, but instead of bottle service, you get to debate laws. Exciting, right? And what about the rest? The non-citizens. They're not exactly chilling on suns with a cocktail. You've got medics, foreigners who live in Athens, who can pay taxes and serve in the army but remain forever outsiders. Then there are the women and slaves, who together form the silent majority. Women's political rights were a non-starter, and slaves, well, they could be flogged for even dreaming of democracy. Now, if you're a bona fide Athenian citizen, you're not just voting for the sake of it. Oh no, this isn't a passive spectator sport. Military service is practically your second job. At 18, you're off to 2 years of compulsory military training. No skipping leg day here, buddy. Being a hoplite is as much a part of your identity as your philosophical musings in the agora. You're expected to defend the city-state like it's the last slice of pizza at a frat party. But let's get real about these responsibilities. Sure, everyone talks about the glory of being part of the Athenian army, but it's not all shiny helmets and heroic tales. Helots, the Spartan equivalent of serfs, would probably laugh at the notion of military glory. Yet, for Athenians, the camaraderie and the chance to protect their way of life are real incentives. Plus, let's not forget the spoils of war. Conquering enemy cities isn't just for bragging rights. It's for real estate, slaves, and resources, like winning a very aggressive game of Monopoly. So what do citizens do when they're not busy soldiering or philosophizing? They're debating in the Phoenix, the ancient version of a town hall meeting, but with more toga-wearing and fewer PowerPoint presentations. The assembly, or ecclesia, is where citizens gather to discuss everything from taxes to war. Imagine a chaotic mix of a Reddit thread and a town hall, and you've got the flavor of Athenian democracy. It's direct and participatory, meaning everyone speaks their mind. And by everyone, I mean those lucky 30,000 citizens. In these debates, the stakes are high, and the rhetoric even higher. You've got to be ready to stand your ground, defend your position, and throw in a philosophical quote or two for good measure. Public speaking isn't just a skill, it's an art form. The Athenians took pride in their oratory prowess, and let's be honest, who wouldn't want to watch a verbal smackdown on whether to increase the olive harvest tax? But beneath all this democratic bravado lies a sobering truth. The system is as fragile as a clay pot. Power is in the hands of a few, and the potential for corruption and demagoguery is as real as the cheap wine flowing at the symposium. Ambitious leaders, or demagogues, can sway the masses with a well-crafted speech, and suddenly decisions are being made based on who can shout the loudest. It's a reminder that democracy, then as now, is a balancing act between idealism and pragmatism. As the agora buzzes with the hum of debates, bartering, and the occasional philosophical rant, take a moment to appreciate the layers of complexity in this ancient city. Athens is a place where ideas are born, where the contrast between freedom and inequality is as stark as the midday sun. It's a city that holds up a mirror to the human condition, reflecting both our noblest aspirations and our darkest realities. And as you wander through this intricate tapestry of life, one thing becomes clear. History is as multifaceted as the people who lived it. So, keep your eyes peeled and your mind open, because this Athenian adventure is far from over. As the agora's lively hum fades into the distance, your stomach sends out its own message. It's time for lunch. But in Athens, midday meals aren't just about silencing hunger pangs. They're a full-blown cultural happening. Think of lunchtime as a mini-symposium, a chance to engage your mind as much as your taste buds. Now, before you conjure up images of ancient Greeks sitting around munching on flaming souvlaki, let's set the record straight on the Athenian diet. For the average citizen, lunch is a humble affair, often starring olives, figs, and the occasional bit of fish. If you're feeling particularly fancy, or your drachmas are burning a hole in your tunic, you might splurge on some imported luxuries like cheese or meat. But don't expect a daily feast. Meat is more of a special occasion guest than a regular fixture on the Athenian table. It's reserved for festivals or sacrifices, not your Tuesday lunch break. In fact, the typical Athenian diet is about as plant-based as a modern vegan's Instagram feed. Bread, grains, and legumes form the backbone of everyday meals, with olive oil generously drizzled over everything like a culinary exclamation point. Now, contrast this with the diet of Athenian slaves, and you'll see the stark disparities that define ancient life. Their meals are far simpler and less frequent, often consisting of leftovers or a thin porridge called marza. It's a grim reminder that while the citizens might be philosophizing about the nature of justice, their kitchen tables tell a different story about inequality. But hold on to your olives, because food in Athens isn't just sustenance, it's a status symbol. How you eat and what you eat says a lot about who you are. Inviting someone over for a meal is akin to sharing a peek into your personal wealth and social standing. This is where the symposium comes in, that infamous Greek social gathering that's been romanticized as a place of deep philosophical musings and endless wine. Picture a room filled with men reclining on couches, sipping diluted wine, and engaging in spirited debates that dance somewhere between intellectual and inebriated. Ah, but here's the kicker. Those wine-soaked discussions weren't always the pinnacle of philosophical enlightenment they're cracked up to be. Sure, you might get the occasional Socratic gem, but let's be real. Mixing alcohol and highbrow debates is a recipe for some pretty colorful exchanges. It's like expecting a Nobel Prize-winning idea to emerge from a frat party. The wine was usually mixed with water, a practice that supposedly kept the conversation civilized. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. Many symposiums likely ended with more slurred speech than Socratic dialogue. And while we're debunking myths, let's tackle the notion that these gatherings were democratic hotspots. The truth: symposiums were exclusive affairs, open only to male citizens. Women, slaves, and medics need not apply. It's a boys' club where the cost of entry is a hefty ego and a willingness to engage in verbal sparring. Yet, even in this male-dominated space, there's a hierarchy at play. The wealthier you are, the more impressive your symposium. Lavish spreads, rare wines, and exotic imports. These are the tools of social currency that elevate your standing in the eyes of your peers. Amidst all this feasting and philosophizing, it's easy to forget that Athens is a city where luxury and poverty exist in stark contrast. For every symposium filled with wine and witty banter, there's a family struggling to make their meager rations stretch. It's a tale as old as time, the haves and the have-nots, sharing the same city but living worlds apart. And so, as you savor your midday meal, whether it's a modest serving of olives or a more indulgent array of delicacies, consider the layers of meaning behind each bite. In Athens, food is not just nourishment, but a reflection of power, privilege, and the complex social tapestry that weaves through every aspect of life. As your lunch draws to a close, you can't help but ponder the paradoxes that define this ancient world, where democracy and inequality dine side by side at the table of history. With your appetite for both food and knowledge satiated, it's time to venture further into the heart of Athens. The sun casts long shadows as you meander through bustling streets, each corner revealing another chapter in the city's rich narrative. You've had a taste of the Athenian dream, but there's so much more to uncover in this land of contradictions and complexities. So, tighten those sandals and ready your mind, because your journey through ancient Athens is only just beginning. And just like that, we pivot from the bustling streets of Athens to the quieter, more hidden corners of ancient life, the domestic sphere. It's the part of the day where we slip behind closed doors, away from the agora's cacophony, and into the heart of Athenian homes. But let's not sugarcoat it. While democracy might be the public face of Athens, home life is more of a medieval fiefdom, where women are the serfs. First, let's talk about marriage in Athens. Imagine you're a young Athenian girl, say 14 years old. Instead of worrying about geometry homework or who to follow on TikTok, you're prepping for marriage. Yes, 14. Barely old enough to appreciate a good philosophical debate, but definitely old enough to be matched with someone at least twice your age. Why such youthful nuptials? Well, in a society where women are expected to bear children and manage household affairs, starting early is seen as practical, albeit a bit unsettling by today's standards. But before you start picturing ancient Greek weddings as romantic candlelit affairs, let's clear the air. Marriages in Athens are less about love and more about mergers. They're arranged by the fathers, often without the bride's input, and the main goal: produce legitimate offspring to continue the family line. The dowry is a key player here, a financial agreement that seals the deal. Think of it as a historical prenup, minus the lawyers. Now, what happens after the wedding bells, or whatever the ancient equivalent was, start ringing? Did these young brides suddenly become mistresses of their own fates? Not quite. Athenian women are expected to run their households, which means managing slaves, overseeing spinning and weaving, and producing heirs. It's a life largely confined to the home, and let's be real, the walls of an ancient Greek house aren't exactly soundproof barriers against the hum of the city or the whims of their husbands. Speaking of education, here's a nugget of surprise, or perhaps disappointment. While boys are off to school to learn rhetoric, philosophy, and how to dominate a debate like a pro, girls are educated in domestic skills. Forget Plato and Aristotle. It's all about perfecting the art of managing a household. Sure, literacy might be part of the package for girls from wealthier families, but for the most part, their education is about as exciting as watching paint dry, unless you're really into embroidery. Now, let's bust a myth or two. Spartan women were said to be the bay and say of the ancient world, independent, educated, and owning their lives, or so the legend goes. But while they did enjoy more freedom compared to their Athenian counterparts, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Spartan women were educated, yes, but their curriculum included physical training to ensure they could produce strong warriors. Their freedom was functional, not feminist. They managed estates while their men were off playing soldiers, but this was out of necessity, not gender equality. Back in Athens, the contrast is stark. Athenian women couldn't own property or vote. Their lives were restricted to the oikos, or household, a domain they ruled with the iron fist of domesticity. In fact, the only time they might venture out was for religious festivals or funerals, hardly the stuff of epic adventures. Yet, despite these limitations, they wielded influence in subtle ways, using cunning and domestic prowess to navigate their world. They were the unsung CEOs of the home, the silent architects of Athenian society. Children, on the other hand, float somewhere between cherished heirlooms and future investments. Boys are groomed for public life and military service, entering the ephebic training at 18, which is like boot camp, but with more philosophy and less yelling. Girls, meanwhile, are prepped for their roles as wives and mothers. Childhood in Athens is brief, and play quickly gives way to responsibility. And let's not forget the economic side of this domestic equation. Dowries can be a financial burden on families, a sort of ancient mortgage that ensures your daughter's social standing. It's a transaction dressed up as tradition, where love is a nice-to-have, not a must-have. The stark reality. The economics of marriage underscore the social structures of Athens, ensuring property and wealth stay within the family lines. As we delve into the domestic life of Athens, it becomes clear that this world is a complex tapestry of duty, tradition, and social expectation. Women and children are not merely passive participants, but active players in the Athenian drama. Their roles may be hidden from public view, but they are integral to the city's functioning. It's a reminder that even in a society heralded for its public life, the private sphere is equally rich with stories and significance. So, as you reflect on the lives of Athenian women and children, consider the intricate dance of freedom and restriction, of power quietly wielded behind the scenes. It's a world of contrasts, where the domestic realm is both a sanctuary and a prison, a place of influence and limitation. And as we leave these homes and head back into the public sphere, the complexities of ancient life continue to unfold, layer by layer, revealing the depth and diversity of human experience. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a golden hue over Athens, the city starts to buzz with anticipation. It's theater night, an ancient Netflix binge, but with more drama and fewer subscription fees. The theater is a cultural cornerstone, where citizens gather to watch plays that entertain, critique, and occasionally scandalize. Picture the theater of Dionysus, cradled on the slopes of the Acropolis, accommodating up to 17,000 spectators. That's almost the entire population of a small modern town, all crammed together, eagerly awaiting the curtain to metaphorically rise. Because literally, curtains weren't a thing yet. Theater in ancient Greece isn't just about watching actors in masks and togas. It's a full-blown social event that combines the elements of a blockbuster movie premiere and a heated town hall meeting. Here, the playwrights are the stars, their names as revered as the Kardashians of their time. Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. These guys knew how to pull an audience, and they didn't need CGI to do it. Their plays are a mix of tragedy and comedy, often tackling themes that resonate with the social and political issues of the day. But before you think of these playwrights as mere entertainers, let's dive into the real meat of the matter. Greek plays serve as a public forum, a way to critique society without getting into a fistfight in the agora. They explore weighty themes, the tension between free will and fate, the folly of hubris, the complexities of justice. Through characters and stories, they hold up a mirror to Athenian society, reflecting its triumphs and failures. It's like ancient therapy, but with less talking and more dramatic monologues. Take, for instance, the plays of Aristophanes, the original king of satire. His comedies are sharp, critical, and not afraid to poke fun at everyone from politicians to philosophers. In Lysistrata, he imagines women staging a sex strike to force their husbands to negotiate peace, a bold plot for any era. Aristophanes uses humor to challenge societal norms, proving that laughter can be a powerful tool for reflection and change. It's a reminder that even in ancient times, the arts are a platform for dissent and discourse. Yet, the theatre isn't just about lofty ideals and philosophical debates. It's also a place where stark realities come crashing down. The very citizens who laugh and cry at these performances are the same ones perpetuating the inequalities that these plays often critique. As they watch the tragedies unfold on stage, it's hard to ignore the irony. A society that prides itself on democracy and intellectual freedom is built on a foundation of inequality and exclusion. Theatre tickets, by the way, are subsidized by the state for poorer citizens, an early form of arts funding. This move ensures that even the less wealthy can partake in the cultural feast. But let's not romanticize it too much. This isn't a purely altruistic endeavor. The state knows that theatre is a way to unify and educate its citizens, to instill values and provoke thought. It's a cultural investment with political undertones, a way to keep the populace engaged and reflective. As the final act draws to a close and the audience disperses into the Athenian night, there's a palpable sense of shared experience. Theatre has done its job, stirring emotions, sparking debate, and perhaps even planting the seeds of change in the minds of its viewers. But as they return to their lives, the disparity between the grandeur of the evening and the harsh realities of daily life remains stark. The romanticized image of Greek life is all too tempting. Philosophers in togas, grand spectacles under the stars, a society of intellect and debate. But beneath this alluring facade lies a world of stark hierarchies and systemic inequalities. The very democracy that Athens boasts about excludes women, slaves, and medics, leaving them voiceless in the political arena. It's a reminder that history is complicated, a blend of ideals and imperfections. Reflecting on these ancient practices, it's hard not to draw parallels with our own modern society. The issues of inequality, exclusion, and the power of art to provoke change are as relevant today as they were in the time of Pericles. We still grapple with the balance between freedom and responsibility, between privilege and justice. The ancient Greeks might have laid the foundation for Western civilization, but we're still working on the renovation. As you wander away from the theatre, your mind buzzing with the evening's drama, consider the legacy of this ancient city. Athens is a place of contradictions, where democracy and inequality coexist, where art and politics intersect. It's a city that challenges us to think critically about our own world, to question the narratives we build and the systems we uphold. So, as you drift into the night, let the echoes of the past guide your thoughts. Remember that history is a story of continuity and change, a reminder that even in the face of imperfection, there's always room for progress. In the end, the lessons of Athens aren't just about the past. They're about how we choose to shape our future. A medieval cathedral bell rings with all the subtlety of a freight train, and congratulations, you're now awake. Forget snooze buttons. The medieval wake-up call is relentless. As you rub the sleep from your eyes, the first question is already forming. Who thought it was a good idea to build these towering stone giants in an age where the wheelbarrow was cutting-edge tech? Well, my friend, buckle up, because this isn't just architecture. It's a testament to ambition, faith, and a touch of medieval madness. Let's talk about construction. These cathedrals were the skyscrapers of their time, reaching dizzying heights of up to 160 meters, like the spire of Lincoln Cathedral. Think about it. No cranes, no modern engineering, just an army of workers and a whole lot of pulleys. The sheer manpower required was astronomical. Hundreds of masons, carpenters, and laborers toiled for decades, sometimes even centuries. Take Cologne Cathedral, for instance. Its construction started in 1248 and wasn't completed until 1880. Yes, you heard that right. More than 600 years. Talk about a long-term project. Imagine what it was like to be a common laborer on one of these sites. Your day starts at dawn, and you're lugging stones that weigh as much as a small car. The pay, a pittance, if you were lucky. It's no wonder many builders didn't live to see their work completed. It was a dangerous gig, with scaffolding more precarious than a game of Jenga. The risk of falling, ever present. Oh, and let's throw in some lead poisoning from all that lead-based mortar for good measure. Occupational hazards, medieval style. But why go through all this trouble? These cathedrals weren't just places of worship. They were statements, both religious and political. The church was flexing its muscles, asserting dominance over the landscape and the populace. These cathedrals were the ultimate power move, saying, "Look at what we can do. God is on our side." It was ecclesiastical one-upmanship at its finest. Kings and bishops competed to build bigger and grander, each trying to outdo the other's divine real estate. Now, let's talk cash. Erecting these stone behemoths was not cheap. Financing such a project was like trying to fund a modern Olympic Games. The costs could run into the medieval equivalent of millions. Take the Amiens Cathedral, for example. It was so expensive that the locals were taxed heavily, and many found themselves in debt. The church often had to resort to creative fundraising, like selling indulgences, a ticket to heaven, or so they claimed, for the right price. Sounds like a medieval Kickstarter, but with a lot more guilt. And those flying buttresses, not just architectural flair. They were ingenious solutions to a problem. How to support these massive structures without thickening the walls to fortress-like proportions. These external supports allowed for those stunning stained glass windows, masterpieces of art and storytelling in a time when most people couldn't read. The windows were a visual Bible, narrating tales and saints' lives in vivid color. But here's a fun fact. The glass was so valuable that it was often removed during wars to prevent it from being stolen. Imagine your modern-day security system being a bunch of guys carefully taking out your windows. As you walk through the cathedral, it's not just the grandeur that hits you, it's the noise. Stone can echo like nobody's business. Every footstep, every whispered prayer bounces off the walls in a symphony of sound. And then there are the gargoyles. Oh yes, those delightful stone creatures perched on the edges. You might think they're just for decoration, but they serve a very practical purpose. Drainage. Rainwater pours out of their mouths, protecting the stonework from erosion. But let's be honest, if you're going to have a drainage system, why not make it look like a monster is spewing water from on high? Medieval architects knew how to have fun. These cathedrals were more than just religious centers. They were the heart of the community. Markets, festivals, and even royal coronations took place in their shadow. They were the medieval equivalent of a town square, a place where news was shared and lives unfolded. But don't romanticize it too much. Life in the Middle Ages was tough, and these grand buildings often stood in stark contrast to the squalor of everyday life. While the cathedral soared above, the streets below were often muddy and cramped, with livestock wandering freely. The contrast between heavenly aspirations and earthly realities couldn't have been more pronounced. So, as you stand there, overwhelmed by the sheer scale and ambition of it all, remember that these cathedrals are more than just stones stacked high. They are stories frozen in time, tales of human endeavor, belief, and yes, a fair bit of hubris. And while you might not last a day as a medieval laborer, or even just listening to that incessant bell, you can at least appreciate the audacity of it all. But hey, watch your step on the way out. Those gargoyles aren't just spitting rainwater. They're laughing at the very notion of modern plumbing. And just when you thought dodging gargoyle spit was your biggest challenge, welcome to the labyrinthine world of medieval cathedral hierarchy. Forget any notions of a cumbia spirit of camaraderie among the clergy. This place operated more like a medieval corporate ladder, complete with power struggles and Machiavellian chess moves that'd make even Littlefinger blush. You're probably wondering who runs the show here. Enter the bishop, the medieval equivalent of a CEO with a mitre instead of a corner office. Not just a spiritual leader, he wielded real political and economic clout. Bishops were often more concerned with land management and tax collection than saving souls. Take the Bishop of Winchester, Henry of Blois, in the 12th century. He was not only a bishop, but also a loyal advisor to his brother, King Stephen. Talk about a networking pro. And don't think these guys were living in monastic simplicity. The bishop's palace was a fortress of luxury, complete with lavish banquets that'd make a modern influencer's brunch look like small potatoes. It wasn't uncommon for bishops to host feasts with hundreds of guests, while their coffers were filled with tithes from the local peasants. A spiritual calling, sure, but with some serious fringe benefits. Now, let's take a step down the ladder to the dean, the bishop's right-hand man. If the bishop was the CEO, the dean was the COO, overseeing the daily grind of cathedral operations. A dean like John de Grandison, who served in Exeter in the 14th century, had to handle everything from managing clergy disputes to ensuring the cathedral was well maintained. He was the fixer, the one who kept the show running smoothly while the bishop hobnobbed with the elite. Below the dean were the canons, essentially the middle managers of the medieval church. Canons were responsible for the cathedral's liturgical services and administrative duties. They often came from noble families, which wasn't just a coincidence. Noble birth was your backstage pass to higher ecclesiastical roles, making the medieval church a breeding ground for nepotism. It's all about who you know, after all. But let's not forget the choir boys, the acolytes, and the minor clergy who made up the base of the ecclesiastical pyramid. These were the foot soldiers of the cathedral, performing the grunt work while dreaming of climbing the ecclesiastical ranks. Acolytes, often young boys, assisted in the liturgical services, with aspirations of becoming priests someday. Think of them as medieval interns, working tirelessly for little more than a pat on the head and perhaps a promise of future advancement. Of course, not everyone was content with their lot. The church was rife with political maneuvering, with ambitious clergy often scheming for higher positions. It wasn't uncommon for bribes to grease the wheels of ecclesiastical promotion. The 15th century Bishop of Winchester, William of Wykeham, was rumoured to have used his architectural talents to curry favour with King Edward Roman III, securing his rapid ascent through the ranks. It's less about divine intervention and more about strategic career planning. And let's talk about the myth of the humble, pious clergy. The reality was far more complex. Yes, there were those genuinely devoted to their faith, but many were motivated by the perks of power and prestige. The church was a lucrative career path for the ambitious, with positions offering wealth and influence that few could resist. In the 14th century, the Avignon papacy became infamous for its corruption, with clerics living in opulence while the average parishioner struggled to make ends meet. So, while the cathedral might seem like a house of God, it was just as much a house of politics and economics. These medieval men of the cloth were as concerned with worldly affairs as spiritual ones. The church was a microcosm of the wider medieval society, reflecting its hierarchies, its ambitions, and its moral ambiguities. It's no wonder that many found their calling here, whether it was divine or decidedly more temporal. All this scheming and hierarchy might seem a world away from the spiritual tranquility you'd expect in such a holy place. But remember, behind the incense and the hymns, the cathedral was a stage where power was brokered, and the drama of human ambition played out in full view of the Almighty. Its Game of Thrones meets the divine comedy, a saga of ambition, faith, and sometimes a bit of divine retribution. And as you navigate this world, just be glad you're only a visitor, because living this medieval drama would have been a full-time job. So there you are, navigating a medieval cathedral, an architectural marvel and political chessboard rolled into one. But wait, that rumble you hear isn't the choir practicing. It's your stomach, reminding you it's time for lunch. Welcome to the medieval culinary scene, where the idea of a happy meal might leave modern foodies running for the hills. Picture this. It's midday and you're famished. But hold your horses, or maybe your oxen, since we're in the Middle Ages. You won't find anything remotely resembling a farm-to-table brunch. Instead, your average cathedral-goer might be munching on something that could best be described as rustic. Bread was the staple, the cornerstone of medieval diet, but let's be honest, calling it bread is kind of generous. Made from rye or barley, it was dense, heavy, and could double as a doorstop. Forget the artisanal sourdough you love to Instagram. This was more like eating a brick. In times of famine, the bread might even be bulked up with less appetizing fillers. Think ground acorns or beans. Yum! If you're lucky, there's a bit of cheese on the side, but not the creamy brie or tangy cheddar that graces our modern charcuterie boards. Medieval cheese was often hard and robust, built for longevity, not luxury. And let's not forget the ever-present pottage. a thick soup or stew, usually a mix of whatever grains and vegetables were on hand. Meat was a rarity, unless you wandered into the wealthier parts of town. Even then, it was more likely to be salted or pickled to make it last longer. Refrigeration was still centuries away, after all. Now, let's chew on the economics of this medieval meal. You're not just eating, you're navigating a complex web of agricultural production and feudal economics. The typical medieval peasant was at the mercy of the land, quite literally betting their next meal on the success of the harvest. A bad crop could spell disaster, leading to skyrocketing prices, and in the worst cases, famine. Grain was the currency of survival, and controlling it was a power move as cunning as any political maneuver. Lords and landowners wielded enormous influence by controlling access to mills, where grain was ground into flour. It wasn't just about feeding the masses, it was about controlling them. Fasting, too, was part of the medieval religious experience, but forget any notion of spiritual purity. Sure, fasting was about piety and devotion, but it was also a handy tool for social control. The church dictated numerous fasting days, nearly half the year for the devout, when consumption of meat, eggs, and dairy was prohibited. This wasn't just about spiritual discipline, it was an economic strategy. By regulating consumption, the church could stabilize the food supply and maintain social order. And let's be honest, it's much easier to govern a populace when they're not hungry. Bread, in particular, was a matter of life and death. In 14th century Paris, the price of bread was so crucial that it was regulated by the government. A loaf could cost anywhere from 1 to 2 deniers, but during times of shortage, prices could double or even triple. Imagine your daily bread being as volatile as the stock market, one day affordable, the next a luxury item. For peasants, who spent up to 80% of their income on food, a price hike could mean the difference between subsistence and starvation. And let's not forget the water. In a world where clean water was as elusive as a unicorn, ale and wine were the beverages of choice. Even children drank ale, albeit a weaker version, because it was safer than water, which was often rife with contaminants. Wine was a bit more exclusive, the drink of the wealthy, or those living in regions like Bordeaux or Burgundy, where vineyards flourished. So, if you were quenching your thirst with wine, congratulations, you were either well off or geographically blessed. As you savor this medieval feast, or endure it, as the case may be, remember that food was as much about identity as it was sustenance. What you ate, and how you ate it, signified your place in the social hierarchy. The wealthy dined on lavish banquets with multiple courses, while the poor made do with simple fare. And let's not forget the ecclesiastical elite, who feasted in style even on fasting days by creatively interpreting what constituted meat. Fish was fair game, leading to some interesting loopholes. Beavers, for example, were considered fish because of their aquatic habits. Yes, you heard that right. Beaver for dinner, anyone. So, as you munch on your medieval fare, think about the layers of history and economics simmering in your stew. You're not just feeding your body, you're participating in a system that dictated the rhythm of life for centuries. And while the flavors might not be what you'd call gourmet, they tell a story of survival, power, and the ever-present struggle to control the most basic human necessity, food. And remember, this isn't just about eating. It's about understanding a world where every bite is a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of stability in a precarious existence. As you finish your meal, spare a thought for the peasants who toil to bring this food to your table and the complex web of forces that govern their lives. And let's face it, in a world without gluten-free options or vegan substitutes, medieval dining was less about choice and more about chance. Keep all this in mind as you ready yourself for the afternoon in this cathedral of contradictions, where the sacred and the mundane intertwine in a dance as old as time itself. And just as your stomach settles from the rustic medieval feast, you're whisked into the looming shadows of evening, where the cathedral transforms into a sensory spectacle. It's service time, and let me tell you, this isn't your grandmother's Sunday Mass. As the daylight wanes, the cathedral becomes a theater of divine pomp and circumstance. You're about to get hit with a sensory overload that would make a modern rave look like a library reading. First up, the music. If you thought a church choir was just a bunch of people singing hymns, think again. Medieval cathedrals were serious about their acoustics. The choir was the medieval equivalent of a rock band. We're talking Gregorian chants that could make the hair on your neck stand on end. These chants were meticulously designed to echo through the stone arches, creating an almost supernatural soundscape. Forget your Spotify playlists. This was the original surround sound. The choirs weren't just there to provide a background track. They were strategically funded and trained to perfection. Why? Because a stellar choir was akin to a modern brand logo. It was all about prestige and influence, and a well-heeled choir could draw pilgrims and their money from miles around. Let's not forget the economic power play behind the music. Choir boys were often recruited from far and wide, sometimes costing a small fortune. In 14th century England, a skilled choir boy could earn as much as a skilled craftsman. Investing in these pint-sized Pavarottis was a power move, a way for the cathedral to flex its divine muscle and attract wealthy patrons. And just like today's brands splurge on celebrity endorsements, back then, an investment in a top-notch choir was a surefire way to boost the cathedral's standing and coffers. As the choir fills the air with their ethereal harmonies, your nose is greeted by the intoxicating scent of incense. It's not just for show. It's a medieval olfactory experience designed to evoke the divine, mask the stench of unwashed bodies, and let's be honest, add a bit of drama to the proceedings. The dense clouds of frankincense and myrrh were believed to carry prayers up to heaven, but they also served the practical purpose of purifying the air in a time when personal hygiene was more of a suggestion than a practice. It was essentially the medieval air freshener, adding a layer of mystique to the service and masking the reality of crowded worshippers packed into a stone behemoth. As you navigate through the sensory symphony of the service, your eyes can't help but be drawn to the vibrant stained glass windows. These weren't just decorative elements. They were medieval Instagram in all its curated glory. Colorful, inspiring, and telling stories with every pane, these windows were the Bible for the illiterate, narrating tales of saints, sinners, and everything in between. But don't be fooled. These windows were as much about politics as they were about piety. Each scene was carefully chosen to convey messages of power and divine right. Kings and bishops often used these illustrations to reinforce their authority, subtly reminding the masses who was in charge both in heaven and on earth. And talk about a hefty price tag. These kaleidoscopic masterpieces were some of the most expensive features of the cathedral. Crafting stained glass required skilled artisans, and the materials themselves, like cobalt blue and gold leaf, were costly. In today's money, a single window could run you a cool $1 million. It was an investment, a statement piece that spoke volumes about the cathedral's wealth and influence. Just like today's luxury brands, these windows were heavily curated, designed to evoke awe and loyalty, while carefully managing the cathedral's image. The art wasn't limited to the windows, either. The walls themselves were canvases for frescoes and sculptures, each telling a story, each imbued with layers of meaning. These were the medieval PowerPoint presentations, rich with symbolism and coded messages. But let's not romanticize it too much. Behind every angelic face carved in stone or painted in vibrant colors lurked the cold, hard reality of church propaganda. It was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about reinforcing the social order. These artistic endeavors served to remind the congregation of the divine hierarchy, with God and the church firmly at the pinnacle. And if you're thinking all this sounds like a lot of work for a few hours of worship, you're not wrong. But remember, in a world where most people lived in rudimentary huts and struggled daily for survival, stepping into a cathedral was like entering another realm. It was a place where the mundane and the divine collided, a sensory experience designed to awe, inspire, and remind the faithful of their place in the grand celestial scheme. So as you stand there, enveloped in the sights, sounds, and sense of a medieval service, take a moment to appreciate the sheer theatricality of it all. It's a testament to human creativity and ambition, a carefully orchestrated dance of the sacred and the secular. And while you might be tempted to romanticize the majesty of it, never forget the underlying motivations, political power plays, economic strategies, and a hefty dose of social control. In the end, this was medieval branding at its finest, a reminder that even in matters of faith, there's always more than meets the eye. As you leave the service, eyes still dazzled by the stained glass, remember, you're stepping back into a world where the line between the divine and the earthly was as blurred as those rainbow-hued windows. And as you exit the cathedral, blinking in the fading daylight, let's chew on what these medieval marvels have left us besides sore feet and a craving for modern conveniences. Sure, they were spiritual fortresses, but these stone giants also reshaped the landscape of human achievement. Cathedrals weren't just built to scrape the sky. They were the bedrock of cultural and intellectual life in an era often mischaracterized as the Dark Ages. Spoiler alert, it was a lot less dark and a lot more dazzling than you'd think. Take a moment to consider how cathedrals served as the incubators of knowledge. Universities, as we know them today, took root in the shadow of these towering structures, with the cathedral schools of Paris and Bologna leading the charge. The seeds of the Renaissance were planted right here, with scholars hunched over manuscripts by flickering candlelight. They were the OG knowledge hubs, long before Google or Wikipedia turned up. In fact, by the 12th century, the University of Paris had become a beacon for intellectual inquiry, drawing scholars like Thomas Aquinas to its storied halls. Imagine debating theology under the same roof that echoed with the hymns of the devout, a collision of the sacred and the scholarly. And those stained glass windows weren't just eye candy. They were educational tools. They told stories in a pre-literate world, offering the masses a glimpse into biblical tales and moral lessons, a medieval PowerPoint presentation in vivid colors. By the way, constructing these windows wasn't just a craft, it was a science. Medieval glaziers were the chemists of their day, mixing potash and sand with metallic oxides to create those vibrant hues that still captivate us. This wasn't merely about beauty. It was about communication, education, and yes, a dash of medieval marketing genius. But let's not gloss over the political chess game these cathedrals were enmeshed in. They were more than architectural wonders. They were statements of power. In the hands of bishops and kings, cathedrals were diplomatic tools, flexing divine favor and temporal might. Just look at the rivalry between the English and French crowns, where the construction of ever grander cathedrals mirrored their political tensions. The Notre Dame de Paris, for example, was not just a cathedral. It was a symbol of France's burgeoning power in the Western world, its soaring spires reaching toward heaven as if to say, "We are chosen." This isn't to say that everything was sunshine and roses. Far from it. The labor force behind these grand edifices worked under conditions that would make an OSHA inspector faint. Stone masons, carpenters, and laborers risked life and limb on flimsy wooden scaffolds. The Black Death also had a front row seat to these construction sites, disrupting progress with its grim toll. In the 14th century, the plague wiped out roughly a third of Europe's population, a grim reminder that behind those glorious facades lay the harsh realities of medieval life. In economic terms, cathedrals were colossal investments. Their construction required vast sums of money, often draining the coffers of both church and state. Financing these projects was akin to modern crowdfunding, with kings, bishops, and even ordinary citizens contributing. Taxation was a favorite method, with tithes and offerings swelling church treasuries. But it wasn't just about squeezing the peasants. It was also about securing your own celestial real estate. Wealthy patrons often donated fortunes to fund chapels and altars, hoping to curry favor in this life and the next. It was the original pay-to-pray scheme. Now, let's tackle the myth of the Dark Ages. Sure, there were challenging times, but to paint the entire era as a cultural void is as misleading as calling a medieval pottage a gourmet meal. These centuries saw the establishment of foundational institutions, the flourishing of art and architecture, and a vibrant exchange of ideas. The illuminated manuscripts of this era are a testament to the period's complexity and creativity. Monasteries and cathedrals became centers of learning, preserving knowledge through turbulent times. Just think of the Book of Kells or the Codex Amiatinus, masterpieces of medieval art and scholarship that belie any notion of a cultural blackout. As you ponder the cathedral's legacy, it's clear that these structures were more than places of worship. They were crucibles of change. They stood as beacons of hope, centers of community, and symbols of human ambition. They weathered wars, fires, and revolutions, each stone telling a story of resilience. Cathedrals were the medieval internet, connecting people through faith, art, and knowledge. They were the heartbeat of the Middle Ages, their influence echoing through the corridors of time. So, while you might admire the grandeur and the history, let's not forget the creature comforts we enjoy today. As you head home, be thankful for modern engineering, central heating, and a mattress that doesn't double as a medieval torture device. After all, history is best appreciated with a good night's sleep, and the knowledge that, though the past was grand, the present is pretty comfortable too. In the gritty underbelly of 19th century England, there was no need for fairy tales when reality was bizarre enough. Enter the world of Victorian chimney sweeps, where soot was the spice of life, and the job market was about as welcoming as a rain-soaked London morning. You see, the Industrial Revolution had kicked everyone in the pants, and coal was the new black, literally. It was the fuel of choice, warming homes and the ard heart, but it came with a side order of grime and smoke that clung to every surface like an overzealous cat. And where there's smoke, there's a chimney that needs sweeping. Now, you might think of chimney sweeps as those plucky lads from Mary Poppins, but before you start humming, chim chim sherry, let's dispel that myth with the force of a gusty breeze. In reality, these young workers were more like the Dickensian poster children for child labor laws. Imagine, if you will, a 9-year-old boy, skin scrubbed raw and lungs crammed with soot, climbing up a dark, claustrophobic chimney. Doesn't sound so romantic now, does it? The census of 1841 counted roughly 25,000 sweeps in England and Wales, a number that included both adults and children. Most of these kiddos, often referred to as climbing boys, were apprenticed as young as 6, with the tender age of 7 being the legal minimum. As if that was strictly enforced. These kids were sent to work under the guise of training for a future that promised little more than a shorter lifespan and a persistent cough. You can thank the master sweep, the charming figure responsible for their training, who pocketed a tidy profit while the kids did the dirty work. Victorian society had a knack for glossing over the grim details with a sprinkle of romanticism, but primary sources from the time paint a bleaker picture. Charles Kingsley, in his novel The Water Babies, didn't shy away from depicting the harsh realities of a chimney sweep's life. The job was dangerous, dirty, and downright miserable. Imagine crawling through narrow, soot-lined tunnels, your only tools being a brush and a scraper, all while inhaling the equivalent of 1,000 coal fires. It's enough to make anyone wish for a different kind of chimney, say, the kind that leads to Santa Claus. Economically, the situation was a mess. As cities ballooned with industrial growth, the need to heat homes and factories skyrocketed, and so did the demand for sweeps. But here's the kicker. Despite the essential nature of their work, sweeps were paid a pittance. A boy might earn a few pennies a day, while his master raked in the real cash. To put that in perspective, a pound was worth about $130 in today's money, and a climbing boy's yearly earnings might not even amount to that single pound. Talk about a raw deal. Socially, these kids were on the lowest rung of the ladder if they were even on the ladder at all. Many were orphans or from impoverished families, and they often lived in conditions that would make a Dickens novel seem cheerful. Sweeps slept in basements or cramped quarters, sometimes alongside the very soot they spent their days cleaning. Hygiene was an afterthought, and illnesses like chimney sweep's carcinoma, a cancer linked to the job, weren't uncommon. It's a wonder anyone survived long enough to retire from the profession. Politically, the winds of change eventually began to blow, albeit at a snail's pace. The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1788 was the first attempt to regulate the trade, but it was about as effective as using a teacup to bail out the Thames. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that reforms began to take shape, thanks to the efforts of reformers like Lord Shaftesbury, who campaigned tirelessly for the rights of child workers. But even then, enforcement was lax, and the plight of the climbing boys persisted well into the late 1800. So, while the romantic image of the chimney sweep endures in popular culture, the reality was far less charming. These young workers were the unsung heroes of the Victorian era, toiling in the shadows to keep the fires burning while society turned a blind eye. It's a grim chapter in history, but one that serves as a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the need for continuous social reform. In the soot-covered world of the Victorian chimney sweep, there was no room for dreams, only the harsh reality of survival. Now, as we leave behind the charmless image of chimney sweeps as romanticized street performers and face the cold, grimy truth of their lives, let's dig into how these kids ended up in this soot-coated nightmare to begin with. Spoiler alert, it wasn't with a jaunty recruitment jingle or a cheerful handshake. Nope, the recruitment process was more like child trafficking with a side of legal shenanigans. Imagine, if you will, the 19th century family ledger, precariously balanced on the precipice of economic ruin. With industrialization in full swing, the gap between the haves and the have-nots was wide enough to park a steam engine. Enter the struggling family, often scraping by on the edge of destitution, faced with a choice that was less about options and more about survival. The chimney sweeping trade became a grim solution to an even grimmer problem: poverty. You see, in the absence of social safety nets or child welfare systems, because who needs those, right? Families often resorted to selling their children into the life of a chimney sweep. It wasn't advertised in the classifieds, but the arrangement was disturbingly common. The transaction was straightforward. A master sweep would pay a family a few shillings for their child, who'd then become an apprentice. And if you're imagining a cozy mentorship involving life skills and career growth, think again. This was less apprenticeship and more indentured servitude with a side of lung disease. The legal loopholes that allowed this travesty were about as wide as a cart track. While the Chimney Sweepers Act of 1788 had made a feeble effort to regulate the trade, it was more of a bureaucratic shrug than a meaningful intervention. It stipulated that climbing boys couldn't be under the age of 8. Oh, what a relief! And required masters to provide some rudimentary education. But enforcement was as effective as a chocolate teapot. Masters easily sidestepped these regulations, often forging documents or outright ignoring the law. After all, what's a little paperwork when you're making a tidy profit off the back of a child? The economic desperation driving this grim market was palpable. In a country where the annual income of the working class hovered around £20, that's about $2, 600 today. Every penny counted. Selling a child for a few shillings might have been the difference between a meal on the table or another day spent hungry. It's a dark reality that forces us to question the romanticized notion of the Victorian family as a tight-knit, harmonious unit. The truth was often bleaker, driven by necessity rather than choice. And let's talk about those so-called wages, shall we? The pittance that climbing boys earned was barely enough to buy a loaf of bread. While their masters might pocket the equivalent of a small fortune, these children were lucky to earn a few pennies a week. The disparity was staggering, a vivid illustration of the exploitative nature of the trade. The idea of saving up to escape or build a better life was a pipe dream, one filled with soot. Naturally, the social implications were as grimy as the chimneys themselves. These kids were often seen as little more than vermin, scurrying through the city's underbelly. They were the invisible workforce, the cogs in the industrial machine that kept homes warm and factories running. Society turned a blind eye, preferring to focus on the comforts that these invisible hands provided rather than the cost at which they came. It was a form of willful ignorance, a collective shrug at the plight of those who cleaned the very air they breathed. But hold on, there's more to this tale of woe. The masters would often bind these child labourers to them with contracts that were as dubious as a dodgy street vendor's wares. The apprenticeship could last for years, during which the child would have little to no autonomy. Escape was nearly impossible, and those who tried often found themselves back in the soot-lined grasp of their masters, or, worse, in even more dire circumstances. The system was rigged, a carefully constructed trap that offered no exits. Politically, the inertia was palpable. Reformers like Lord Shaftesbury campaigned tirelessly to change these abysmal conditions, but progress was slow, hampered by the vested interests of those who profited from child labour. The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1834 attempted to address these concerns by raising the minimum age to 10 and requiring boys to be registered with the local authorities. Yet, like its predecessors, it was more of a suggestion than a mandate, often flouted by those who saw children not as human beings, but as disposable tools. Despite the odds, there were glimmers of hope, public awareness campaigns, and literary works like Charles Kingsley's. The Water Babies began to shift perceptions, highlighting the cruel realities faced by these young workers. The tide of public opinion slowly turned, laying the groundwork for more robust reforms. Yet, for many climbing boys, these changes came too late. their lives already shaped by years of hardship and exploitation. As we delve deeper into the soot-filled saga of Victorian chimney sweeps, it's clear that the romantic image of the plucky young worker is as misleading as a foggy London morning. The truth was far more complex, a tangled web of economic desperation, legal loopholes, and societal indifference. But don't despair. Our journey through history is far from over. We've got more grime to uncover and myths to debunk, so stay tuned as we continue to explore the shadowy world of Victorian chimney sweeps in all its gritty detail. And so, as we continue our plunge into the soot-stained world of Victorian chimney sweeps, let's roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty, figuratively speaking. The daily grind for these young workers wasn't just a job. It was a gauntlet, a never-ending obstacle course of grime, danger, and downright absurdity. First off, let's talk tools of the trade, or should I say lack thereof. These kids were sent up chimneys with little more than a brush, a scraper, and a prayer. Forget the sophisticated gear you'd expect in a modern-day cleaning arsenal. The Victorian solution to chimney maintenance was to use children as human pipe cleaners. Because why would you spend money on equipment when you can just exploit the workforce? These brushes were often made from sticks and bristles, sometimes improvised with whatever could be scrounged up, like the industrial version of DIY arts and crafts. It's a wonder they didn't hand them a feather duster and call it a day. Now, the physical toll. Oh, where to begin? Imagine you're a kid, not even tall enough to ride the Ferris wheel, and you're crammed into a space barely wide enough to fit your shoulders. Chimneys varied in size, but many were as narrow as 9 inches by 14 inches. Yeah, try squeezing your adult self into that space. These kids contorted their bodies like they were auditioning for Cirque du Soleil, all while inhaling more soot than a barbecue pit master. It's no surprise that many ended up with severely deformed bodies, stunted growth, and respiratory issues that made a lifelong smoker look like a picture of health. And then there was the infamous chimney sweeps cancer. Yes, you heard that right, cancer. Known scientifically as squamous cell carcinoma, this delightful disease typically affected the scrotum of young male sweeps. It was first identified in 1775 by Sir Percival Part, who probably didn't anticipate that future historians would remember him more for this than any other contribution. The cause: prolonged exposure to coal soot, which would lodge in their skin and gradually morph into tumors. And the remedies? Well, let's just say they were as medieval as they come. Treatments ranged from surgical removal, which in an era before anesthesia was as pleasant as it sounds, to bizarre concoctions involving mercury and tar. Honestly, it's a miracle anyone survived the cure, let alone the disease. But if you think that's grim, wait until you hear about the gallows humor that surrounded this profession. Despite, or perhaps because of, their dire circumstances, chimney sweeps developed a peculiar brand of dark humor. Contemporary accounts often describe how these kids would joke about their own misery, poking fun at the absurdity of their situation. Better a sweep than a sweep's apprentice, they might quip, acknowledging the grim reality that life could always get worse. It was a coping mechanism, a way to find a sliver of humanity in an otherwise dehumanizing job. The absurdity of using children as human chimney brushes wasn't lost on everyone, though. Social reformers saw this as a grotesque metaphor for a society willing to sacrifice its youngest for the sake of convenience. Remember, these kids weren't just cleaning the chimneys of quaint little cottages. They were also maintaining the flues of burgeoning factories and the grand homes of the wealthy. It was a dirty job, but someone had to do it. And by someone, society meant the most vulnerable among them. This absurdity wasn't just a punchline for contemporary humorists. It was a stinging indictment of a system that valued profit over people. The chimney sweep's plight became a rallying cry for those advocating for child labor reform. Their suffering wasn't just a tragic footnote in history. It was a catalyst for change, albeit a slow one. But let's not jump the gun. We'll get to that part of the story later. For now, let's stay with our young sweeps as they navigate their soot-covered world. The typical workday for a climbing boy was grueling, starting as early as 4 a.m. and often stretching into the evening. They'd be sent up chimney after chimney, scrambling through narrow flues with a brush in hand and a master barking orders below. On average, a climbing boy might clean up to 4 chimneys a day. This wasn't the kind of job where you clock out and leave your worries at the office. This was survival, pure and simple. And survival was no guarantee. The dangers were countless: getting stuck in a chimney, falling from rooftops, or suffocating from soot inhalation. Deaths were not uncommon, and when they occurred, they were often chalked up to accidents, as if sending a child into a dark, narrow tunnel wasn't an accident waiting to happen. Some masters, in their infinite wisdom, would even light fires beneath stuck boys to encourage them to move, a practice as inhumane as it was insane. Despite these horrors, the myth of the plucky chimney sweep persisted. Maybe it was easier for society to romanticize their plight than to confront the grim reality. But for the boys who lived it, there was little romance to be found. They knew the truth, a truth that was as black and unforgiving as the soot they cleaned. Yet in the face of adversity, they found resilience. They found camaraderie with their fellow sweeps, and in their own way, they found a sense of identity. And therein lies the paradox. Out of the darkest corners of history come stories of human endurance and spirit. These young sweeps, with their battered bodies and sooty lungs, were more than just victims of circumstance. They were a testament to resilience, a reminder that even in the bleakest conditions, the human spirit can find ways to endure. As we wrap up this segment of our journey, consider this. The chimney sweeps weren't just cleaning chimneys. They were clearing the path for social change. Their story is far from over, and as we continue to peel back the layers of soot, we'll uncover more about the forces that eventually led to reform, the battles won and lost, and the legacy they left behind. So hang tight, because there's plenty more history to sweep through. As we wade further into the murky waters of Victorian chimney sweeping, it's time to meet the unlikely heroes who tried to clean up this mess, not with a brush and scraper, but with legislative elbow grease. Enter Lord Shaftesbury, a man as relentless as a London fog, and twice as determined to clear the air around child labour. Now, before you picture him as a knight in shining armour, let's remember, legislative reform in the 19th century moved at the speed of molasses in a British winter. Lord Shaftesbury, born Anthony Ashley Cooper in 1801, was a name that would become synonymous with social reform. He was a peer who traded the comforts of the aristocracy for the gritty business of politics, armed with more than just a title. Picture a man who, despite his upper-crust upbringing, had this radical notion that children shouldn't be used as chimney brushes. Outlandish, I know. By the time Shaftesbury turned his attention to the plight of the climbing boys, he was already knee-deep in other social causes, fighting for factory reform and the rights of the mentally ill. His passion for change was driven by a belief that even the smallest members of society deserved protection, an idea that was, frankly, revolutionary in an era where children were seen more as small, expendable adults than anything else. The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1834 was Shaftesbury's first real swing at the problem. It wasn't his first act of reform, but it was certainly one of the most challenging. This act attempted to raise the minimum age for climbing boys to 10, a move that, in theory, was a step in the right direction. But here's the kicker. Enforcement was about as solid as a puff of smoke. Masters, ever the resourceful bunch, found ways to dodge the law with the ease of a cat slipping through a fence. Paperwork could be forged, ages could be lied about, and authorities looked the other way more often than not. The Act also required that apprentices be registered with local authorities, which sounds great on parchment, but was as effective as using a sieve to carry water. The system was riddled with loopholes wide enough to drive a horse and cart through. If the idea was to protect the chimney sweeps, it was more of a suggestion than a mandate. And what's a little child's life compared to the smooth operation of a Victorian household? Right, despite these glaring issues, the Act did serve one crucial purpose. It got people talking. Public awareness began to shift, slowly peeling back the layers of soot to reveal the harsh realities faced by these young workers. Writers, reformers, and even some politicians started to rally around the cause, their voices rising like smoke signals calling for change. Lord Shaftesbury wasn't fighting this battle alone. He was joined by other reformers, such as the indefatigable Richard Osler and Michael Sadler, who were equally committed to child welfare. They were the social justice warriors of their day, armed with pamphlets instead of hashtags, but just as relentless in their pursuit of change. The political landscape was as treacherous as a soot-slick rooftop. The Industrial Revolution had turned society on its head, creating a chasm between the wealthy factory owners and the impoverished workers they employed. The ruling classes weren't exactly keen on reforms that threatened their profits, and child labor was a cheap and abundant resource. Convincing Parliament to prioritize the welfare of the climbing boys was about as easy as convincing a cat to take a bath. But Shaftesbury and his allies persisted, their voices echoing through the halls of power like a call to arms. The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1840 followed, which was an improvement in the way that a slightly less leaky boat is still an improvement on a sinking ship. It raised the minimum age for apprentices to 16 and imposed fines on those who employed younger boys. Again, the intentions were noble, but enforcement was another matter entirely. It was like trying to hold back the sea with a broom. Even as these legislative efforts limped forward, the reformers were winning battles on another front: public opinion. The plight of the chimney sweeps captured the public's imagination, thanks in no small part to literary figures like Charles Dickens and Charles Kingsley. Their works painted vivid portraits of the grim realities faced by child workers, turning the tide of public sentiment and putting pressure on politicians to act. Yet, despite these glacial steps towards reform, the reality for many climbing boys remained unchanged. The reforms were paper tigers, toothless and easily ignored by those with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. The 1840 Act might have raised the minimum age, but it was still common to find children as young as 8, sometimes even younger, being sent up chimneys. The reformers faced an uphill battle, one that required not just legislation, but a fundamental shift in societal values. They were fighting against an entrenched system that viewed children as commodities rather than human beings deserving of care and protection. It was a battle that required persistence, creativity, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. As we continue to dig through this sooty saga, we'll see how the efforts of these reformers eventually bore fruit, albeit slowly and imperfectly. The path to change was long and winding, but it was paved with the sweat, tears, and determination of those who refused to accept that the status quo was the best that society could offer. So, while the romanticized image of the chimney sweep persists in popular culture, the reality was far more complex and troubling. It was a world of exploitation and suffering, but also one of resilience and reform. The story of the Victorian chimney sweep is not just a tale of hardship. It is a testament to the power of human compassion and the relentless pursuit of justice, no matter how long it takes. As we prepare to uncover the final chapters in this grimy tale, let's remember that history is not just a record of what happened, but a reminder of what can happen when society chooses to care. The story of the chimney sweeps is not just a relic of the past. It is a call to action for the present and the future. So stick around, because we've still got some soot to shake off and more myths to bust as we continue this journey through one of history's dirtiest jobs. So, as we continue to sift through the ashes of history, let's turn our attention to how the chimney sweep's tale transformed over time, leaving behind a legacy that's as much myth as reality. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the profession of the chimney sweep began to fade, replaced by technological advancements and, mercifully, better labor laws. The soot-stained image of the plucky young sweep, however, lived on, albeit with a glossy Hollywood finish. Enter the age of nostalgia, where the Victorian chimney sweep became a kind of cultural icon, romanticized in literature, film, and even musicals. Yes, I'm looking at you, Mary Poppins. The image of Dick Van Dyke dancing across the rooftops with a jaunty tune and a spotless face is a far cry from the grimy reality faced by the real climbing boys. It's a sanitized portrayal that swaps the harsh truth for a spoonful of sugar, making the brutal history easier to swallow. But let's be honest, it's about as historically accurate as a Wikipedia article written by a time traveler with a faulty memory. Nevertheless, there's something undeniably appealing about the myth of the chimney sweep. It taps into our collective love for the underdog, the scrappy worker who defies the odds. There's a certain charm in the idea of a soot-covered hero, grinning through the grime and embodying the spirit of resilience. But while popular culture has transformed the chimney sweep into a symbol of pluck and perseverance, the historical reality was far more complex and far less cheerful. As the Industrial Revolution marched on, the demand for chimney sweeps dwindled. thanks to innovations like the chimney brush, invented by Joseph Glass in the early 19th century. These brushes, made of cane and whale bone, could clean flues without the need for human pipe cleaners. A revolutionary idea, right? Think of it as the Roomba of its day, sweeping away not just soot, but the need for child labor in chimneys. By the late 1800, the writing was on the wall, or perhaps in the soot, and the number of climbing boys sharply declined. But the decline of the profession didn't mean an instant end to the exploitation of child labor. The struggle for workers' rights continued, evolving into broader movements that sought to protect all children from the harsh realities of industrial work. The Factory Act of 1833 and the Mines Act of 1842 had already paved the way by restricting child labor in factories and mines. But it wasn't until the Education Act of 1870 that a significant shift occurred. This act made elementary education compulsory, slowly pulling children out of the labor force and into classrooms. Imagine that. An educated populace. What a radical idea. The story of the chimney sweep serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of industrial progress. It highlights the ongoing battle between economic necessity and ethical responsibility, a struggle that continues to resonate today. While the chimneys may have been swept clean of soot, the broader fight for workers' rights is far from over. In a world where exploitation has simply taken on new forms, sweatshops, gig economies, and precarious employment, the lessons of the past remain relevant. The plight of the chimney sweeps is a cautionary tale, urging us to remain vigilant against the forces that prioritize profit over people. In the end, the legacy of the chimney sweep is a tangled web of myth and reality, nostalgia and necessity. It's a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, to recognize the resilience of the human spirit, even in the darkest of times. So, while we may smile at the image of a cheerful sweep with a twinkle in his eye, let's not forget the real boys who climbed those chimneys, their backs bent under the weight of society's indifference. They were more than just characters in a story. They were children with dreams, however stifled by soot they may have been. As we close the book on this grimy chapter of history, let's take a moment to reflect on the power of myth and the importance of truth. The tale of the Victorian chimney sweep is a reminder that history is not just a record of what was, but a guide for what could be. It's a call to action, a plea for empathy and understanding, and a testament to the enduring fight for justice. So, the next time you see a chimney sweep portrayed in film or fiction, remember the real story behind the soot. Because in the end, the true legacy of the chimney sweep is not just one of hardship, but of hope, a hope for a world where all children can breathe easy and dream big.